Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. He deliberately chose a different breed of dragon this time and followed a different route. As he traveled toward the capital once more, Wood paid close attention to the time, reasoning that if the time rewind was based on some fixed mechanism, it would trigger again at the same moment. By the time dusk arrived, and the sun had begun to set, Wood finally breathed a sigh of relief. It seems like the time rewind was just some random glitch. Otherwise, this world would be far too strange. Just as Wood was about to relax, however, that familiar wave of dizziness hit him again. Damn it. Did I really just waste another hour? When he opened his eyes again, he was once more back in the same spot on the street, with the same half-eaten apple in his hand, and the same familiar shouts of street vendors around him. Even changing the route and the type of dragon made no difference. And no matter my physical state, everything reverts to the way it was. What the hell is going on in this world? Could it be that this world stage is confined to this town, and as soon as I try to leave, time rewinds to the starting point? This theory wasn't entirely implausible. After all, some games have boundaries. If a character crosses the border, they die, or the game resets. To test his theory, Wood decided not to leave the town this time. Instead, he spent the evening feasting at a local tavern and then returned to his room. But just as he lay down, that cursed dizziness hit him again. What angered Wood the most was that he had no way to resist it. Even when he fought against the dizziness, keeping himself conscious, he still found himself back in the same place on the street. This time, Wood didn't even attempt to leave the town, which meant his earlier assumption was wrong. The time rewind wasn't triggered by his attempt to leave the town. To make matters worse, the time between rewinds was growing shorter. In other words, there was no fixed time or location for when the rewind occurred. It was completely unpredictable. What the hell is this? Am I stuck in a thousands of years trapped in one-day scenario? At least in those stories, there's a fixed 24-hour loop. But now, no matter what I do, I get thrown back to where I started. Including the pirate world, Wood had traveled to several different worlds now. But this was the first time he had ever encountered such an infuriating situation. No matter what he did, or even if he did nothing, as soon as the time rewind effect triggered, he was sent right back to the start. It felt as though his life was no longer his own, but something that could be controlled by someone else. Returning to the starting point once more, Wood didn't move. Instead, he stayed where he was and calmly analyzed the situation. Even in a different world, such an absurd mechanism shouldn't exist. If this were some kind of world rule, it would at least follow a fixed pattern. However, after observing several times, Wood realized that the time rewind had no predictable timing or trigger. Rather than being a fixed world rule, it seemed more like a personal ability. Or a cheat. The time rewind was a bug-like power, and calling it a cheat wasn't far off. Though this world had blessings, Wood didn't believe any of them could be this absurdly overpowered. A power this world-breaking wouldn't belong to a native inhabitant. It was more likely the ability of a cheater. Like a certain kind of person known as a transmigrator. That Natsuki Subaru kid must be behind this, right? There's no one else who could be responsible. With this thought in mind, Wood decided it was time to test his theory by finding that transmigrator, Natsuki Subaru. Although Subaru was weak, with no discernible aura, tracking him would be difficult. However, with his unusual outfit, a tracksuit that stood out in this world, it wouldn't be too hard to spot him in a crowd. Wood leaped onto a high vantage point and began darting across rooftops, scanning the streets below with his sharp eyes. After about 10 minutes of searching, Wood finally spotted Subaru in an alleyway. But before he could approach, Wood saw something shocking. Subaru was being stabbed by a group of thugs and collapsed on the ground, dead. Guess I was wrong after all. If that kid really had a time rewind cheat ability, there's no way he'd die such a pathetic death. Watching Subaru bleed out, Wood realized there was no way he could save him in time. However, just as Wood was about to dismiss his earlier theory, the same wave of dizziness hit him once more. Subaru woke up in a daze, clutching the spot where he had been stabbed. Realizing he had returned to the starting point again, he felt both relief and a deep sense of helplessness. There was no doubt about it now. Subaru's ability as a transmigrator was indeed time rewind, also known as his cheat. At first, Subaru had been thrilled to have such an incredible power. But after using it a few times, Subaru quickly realized how frustratingly useless it was. Chapter 337, Natsuki Subaru, you're a transmigrator too? After being killed by Ram, Natsuki Subaru triggered the return by death ability for the first time. It was through this that he discovered his cheat-like power. On his next reset, Subaru acted much more cautiously. Using his persuasive skills and communication talents, he successfully gained Ram's trust and met the blonde girl who had stolen Amelia's emblem. Felt. While the three of them waited, they were soon met by the person who had hired Felt to steal the emblem, a beautiful, mature woman wearing a bold, low-cut black dress with black stockings and a violet flower in her hair. At first, Subaru thought that such a gorgeous woman couldn't possibly be a bad person. But it didn't take long for him to realize just how cruel and twisted this beautiful woman was. The lady in black was named Elsa Granhirt, a notorious assassin known by the terrifying nickname the Bowl Hunter. Elsa had hired Felt to steal Amelia's emblem but never planned on leaving any witnesses alive from the start. So, it came as no surprise that the three in the shop, including Subaru, were eventually killed by Elsa. Though she was a stunningly beautiful woman, Elsa's skills as an assassin were second to none. Neither the giant Ram nor the swift Felt could put up any resistance against her. As for Subaru, well, there wasn't much to say about his chances. This marked Subaru's second death, and since he died a little later this time, Wood had managed to get further away. On Subaru's third run, hoping to save time, he decided to take a shortcut to the slums. Unfortunately, he ran into some thugs, and a conflict broke out. Overwhelmed by the group, Subaru was beaten to death before he could even make it to Ram's shop. This was why, during Wood's third loop, the time rewind had felt like it triggered even earlier. The last rewind, which was just now, the fourth, had Subaru feeling more confident. He believed he had figured out the thugs' routine by now. While he knew he couldn't defeat Elsa, he thought dealing with the thugs would be easy this time. After managing to knock out a few of them, however, he was caught off guard when one of them pulled out a knife. And so, Subaru, stabbed in the back, collapsed into a pool of blood yet again. After dying 4 times in a row, Subaru was beginning to feel a deep fear, even contemplating giving up entirely. Although his ability allowed him to avoid true death, the fear and pain he experienced with each death were all too real. Ram's death was quick, a single blow, but being killed by Elsa was a true nightmare for Subaru. It was his first time seeing what his own intestines looked like, and every time he recalled that scene, his body shuddered uncontrollably. On one side was his fear of death, and on the other was the super beautiful silver-haired girl. After only a moment's hesitation, Subaru's desire to pursue the beauty won out. This time, Subaru planned to reach Ram's shop ahead of time and warn him and Felt about the danger of the Bowl Hunter, avoiding her altogether. As for the thugs in the alley, after 2 failed encounters, Subaru felt confident that this time he had them handled. But when Subaru rushed into the alley, following the route he remembered so well, ready to deal with the thugs, he found an unexpected figure waiting for him. The 3 thugs who had troubled him were already lying unconscious on the ground. So, can you tell me, Transmigrator boy, were the last 4 time resets you're doing? Seeing Wood suddenly appear, Subaru had wanted to ask what was going on, but Wood's words nearly caused his jaw to drop. After all, he had never told anyone he was a transmigrator, even though his outfit was quite out of place. And yet, this person, whom he had thought was just another local, actually knew what a transmigrator was. Did that mean Wood was also a transmigrator? He wasn't the only protagonist in this world. This handsome, blonde guy was from another world too. Not only that, but Subaru's return by death ability didn't seem to affect Wood at all. In this world, whenever Subaru reset time by dying, everyone's memories were wiped. But if Wood remembered all 4 of Subaru's resets, that meant he was like Subaru, retaining his memories after each death. Before, Subaru had felt that his ability was a bit lame. It didn't directly boost his combat power, and it required his own death to activate. But now, Subaru's frustration was even greater. Not only was his power not unique, but Wood, the handsome blonde guy, also seemed to retain his memories after each reset. This meant Subaru had lost his advantage of foreseeing the future. You're a transmigrator too? Then what's your power? Don't tell me it's also death. Subaru was about to reveal his own power, but as the words left his mouth, he felt an intense pressure, like his heart was being gripped by an invisible hand. Subaru could feel it. If he continued talking, he would definitely die. However, This incident taught him something new. To activate his return by death ability, he didn't necessarily have to be killed by someone else. He could die simply by talking about it. I'm not a transmigrator. Though you might not believe me, I really am a native of this world. Well, maybe a bit more special than the others. The system's simulated lives always placed Wood in the roles of characters who were originally from that world, so what he said wasn't entirely untrue. However, Subaru now considered Wood to be a reincarnator. A type of transmigrator whose soul was reborn in this world, unlike his own situation where both body and soul had crossed over. Just like you said, my transmigrator ability is connected to death. Well, it's as you understand it. So what about your power? Even though we're not the same type of transmigrators, you must have some special ability, right? Previously, Subaru had viewed Wood as a classic second-rate rival character meant to make the protagonist look good. But now, he realized that he wasn't the only hero in this world. And in comparison to himself, Wood was a handsome guy with money, status, and even some combat ability. It was starting to look like Subaru might be the side character after all. As a native of this world, I don't have any special powers. Any strength I have, I gain through hard work, not because some deity handed it to me. But since we've figured out the problem, could I ask you not to die so often? Every time you die, it causes a lot of trouble for others. It might be fine for the other people who lose their memories each time, but for me, having to repeat everything over and over is enough to drive anyone mad. Wood had considered just killing Subaru to end things once and for all. But Subaru's power was too troublesome. If he died, his ability would just trigger another reset. And if Wood tried to imprison him, he'd have to keep a constant watch, since Subaru could die from starvation or some other cause, triggering yet another return by death. You think I want to die? And what's with this unfairness? We're both supposed to be protagonists, so why is my ability so pathetic? I can't even beat a few ordinary thugs. Before knowing about Wood, Subaru had already felt his ability was pretty lackluster. But now that he realized Wood was some kind of reincarnator, Subaru's frustrations boiled over. He had such a useless protagonist power that didn't let him show off at all. And to make matters worse, he wasn't even the only one benefiting from his ability. What was the point of having it? Even without strong powers, with your modern knowledge, you should be able to live well in this world. Just avoid picking fights with people beyond your ability. With modern knowledge, anyone could make a good living in a medieval society like this. Even if Subaru didn't invent anything, he could still thrive as a merchant or in some other trade. Wood couldn't understand why someone like Subaru, who could live comfortably, would go looking for trouble. Wood himself had no choice but to survive in the pirate world, where power was everything. But in this world, he was only living through a simulated life. In order to make this simulation worth it, Wood's goal was to enhance his own strength. Subaru, we're in another world. Don't you want to be the hero who saves the world and earns everyone's admiration? Wood, not at all. Fame is meaningless. I'd much rather just live a lazy life. Subaru, but what about all the beautiful girls in this world? Don't they make your heart race? Wood, do you really think someone who looks like me needs to chase after girls? Subaru was instantly crushed, feeling utterly defeated. He muttered gloomily. Why is it that such a lazy guy like you happens to be both good-looking and powerful, while I, Natsuki Subaru, have grand ambitions but am just a regular weakling in this world? Subaru couldn't help but think that the gods of this world must have been drunk when they mixed up his and Wood's roles. Speaking of which, if you're not interested in girls, what do you think of Amelia? Subaru nervously asked, clearly anxious to hear Wood's opinion. Though it might seem irrelevant, Subaru cared a great deal about this answer because he believed he might have found a way to beat the Bowel Hunter. You mean the silver-haired girl from before? She seems like a good person, but probably a bit naive. I'd say her mind hasn't caught up to her appearance yet. Would be interested in Amelia? The answer was a clear no. He wasn't like Subaru, whose desires could easily cloud his judgment. With the experience of multiple worlds under his belt, especially in the pirate world, Wood had long passed the age of acting on impulse. So, are you confident in your strength? Can you deal with someone who can cut through solid wood and a giant's body with one strike? Subaru, with his limited understanding of power levels, found it hard to gauge Elsa's strength. Even though Subaru wasn't sure how strong the Bowel Hunter was, the fact that she could slice through the massive rum and a wooden counter with one swing made it clear she wasn't just anyone. Oh, someone who can slice through wood and even a giant's tough body? Where is this person? Wood's interest was piqued by Subaru's description of the Bowel Hunter, and he couldn't help but marvel. Subaru truly was the protagonist of this world. Even though Wood had wandered the town for hours without finding anything special, Subaru, a weakling, had somehow encountered such a formidable figure. Now that Wood thought about it, His meeting with Amelia and Puck earlier might have been because Subaru had been nearby. Though Subaru's description of the Bowel Hunter was vague, Wood had a rough idea of her abilities. She seemed to be a decent fighter. Wood hadn't yet fully tested his own current strength in this world. Now, this Bowel Hunter sounded like the perfect challenge. You say this Bowel Hunter will appear at Rom's shop in the slums? Yes, she's the one who hired Felt to steal Amelia's emblem. But we've been chatting for so long now, it's probably too late to stop her. But don't worry, I can use my ability again. We'll meet here next time, and we can. Subaru was about to activate his return by death and reset the timeline once more, but before he could go through with it, Wood held out a hand to stop him. Time may be running out for you, but for me, there's still plenty. How about this? We'll split up. I'll head to Rom's shop to meet this Bowel Hunter, and you can go find some backup? Maybe the town guards or something. I'd really rather not experience another time reset. I've already lived through this day 4 times, and I'm not keen on a 5th. Chapter 338, The Black Stockings Lady appears. Wood's persuasion finally convinced Natsuki Subaru because Subaru himself felt that he relied more on his brains. Even if he followed Wood to the pawnshop, he wouldn't be able to help much. Wood going alone to the pawnshop made sense. He could get there quickly, and even if he couldn't defeat the Bowel Hunter, with his cheat-like abilities, he'd still have a chance to restart the situation. Additionally, since the Bowel Hunter belonged to an assassin organization, Wood's suggestion for Subaru to seek out the town's guards for help was a good idea. Whether Wood could defeat the Bowel Hunter or not, having extra help wouldn't hurt. Of course, Subaru agreed to Wood's suggestion mainly because he didn't want to experience the terror of having his intestines removed by the Bowel Hunter again. As much as the lady in black stockings was pleasant to look at, her twisted personality made everything different. Subaru did not want to go through that horrifying experience a second time. It would be best if Wood could defeat the Bowel Hunter. If things went south, Subaru would rather end his life by using his return by death ability. After parting ways, Wood followed the directions given by Subaru and headed to the pawnshop in the slums. Meanwhile, Subaru returned to the town to search for the patrol guards. Thanks to the directions, Wood didn't waste much time and quickly found the pawnshop, knocking on the door. At first, Wood could hear movement inside the house. As soon as he peeked through the slightly opened door and stepped inside, he immediately sensed a strong gust of wind coming from above. Crack! Wood had just stepped inside when a large wooden club, as thick as an adult's thigh, came crashing down towards his head. However, Wood reacted just in time. Facing the downward swing of the massive club, he threw a punch in response. With a crisp cracking sound, the giant wooden club, thick as a leg and cutting through the air, was shattered into pieces by Wood's punch. Not only did Wood destroy the weapon with one punch, but the powerful impact also sent the massive figure holding the club flying across the room. Is this how you welcome your guests? No wonder that kid Subaru was killed by this stick the first time. Getting hit by a giant like that. For anyone less tough, it wouldn't just be a matter of passing out. The giant Rom was sent flying by Wood's punch, his weapon shattered. Meanwhile, Felt, who had been hiding in the rafters, took this opportunity to leap down from above. With the power of her wind blessing, the blonde girl, already nimble, moved even faster, becoming difficult to catch. As Rom was sent flying, the girl sprang from above, brandishing a short dagger, aiming to stab Wood in the back. However, despite her speed, Wood had already sensed her presence the moment he stepped through the door. As Felt leaped down, Wood reached out with one hand, firmly grabbing her by the throat. Stop. We didn't mean to fight you. We just wanted to confirm if you were the one who hired us. Seeing Felt struggling painfully in Wood's grasp, Rom, having picked himself up, quickly explained. The pawnshop rarely had strangers visiting, and Felt had arranged to meet the person who hired her to steal the emblem for an exchange. Since the client had been wearing a hooded cloak, Felt couldn't clearly see their face. When Wood, a stranger, appeared at their door, Rom and Felt assumed he was their client. In their line of work, if they showed any weakness, the client might try to negotiate a lower payment. So, when they saw Wood, whom they thought was the client, they devised a plan to give him a welcome and show that they weren't to be messed with, ensuring they wouldn't be shortchanged. What they didn't expect was that this mysterious client would be so powerful. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not the person you were waiting for. In fact, I'm here to wait for them too. As for the one you were supposed to meet, I believe they go by the Bowel Hunter. A pretty ruthless character. With your welcoming approach, I'd say you're likely to end up dead when they show up. Wood's knowledge came mostly from what Subaru had told him. And in fact, it was true that the Bowel Hunter had no intention of leaving any witnesses. In Subaru's second return by death, both Rom and Felt were killed by her. Releasing his grip on Felt, Wood let her collapse to the ground, gasping for air. Meanwhile, Rom froze for a moment upon hearing the name the Bowel Hunter. Then confirmed. The Bowel Hunter? You mean that famous assassin from the north? Why would she hire Felt to steal something? Don't assassin organizations only accept jobs to kill and rob people? As the owner of a pawnshop, Rom clearly had some knowledge of the underground world. And the name the Bowel Hunter wasn't unfamiliar to him. Elsa Granhart, known as the Bowel Hunter, was an assassin from the northern lands, infamous for cutting open her victims' stomachs, earning her the chilling title in the West. Even within assassin circles, she was considered a fearsome presence. If she was the one who hired Felt, her ruthless nature meant she likely wouldn't leave any survivors. I don't know why she hired you to steal this item. Maybe someone else hired you, and the Bowel Hunter was just sent to collect it and take care of you afterward. As for what your deal was and what she asked you to steal, I'm not interested. I'm only here because someone asked me to be, and partly because I'm curious about the Bowel Hunter. It seemed Subaru was determined to recover the emblem for Amelia, hoping to win her favor. However, considering Subaru's fighting ability against the Bowel Hunter, he'd probably die dozens of times before succeeding. Wood didn't want to keep reliving the same day, so he decided to confront this Bowel Hunter himself. Rom and Felt weren't sure whether to believe Wood's words, but they had no choice but to listen. After all, they had already seen that they weren't a match for him. So, you're really not going to leave? Just so you know, I've never seen this Bowel Hunter, so I have no idea how strong she is. If we start fighting, I won't be able to protect you. Based on their earlier scuffle, Wood could tell that Rom and Felt had some skills, but considering how they were killed instantly in Subaru's previous loop, Wood wasn't sure how strong their opponent really was. Don't underestimate me, pal. If I wanted to run, there aren't many people who could catch me. And since this Bowel Hunter not only tricked me but plans to kill me, I at least want to see what she looks like. After chatting for a while, Felt realized that Wood was the person she had bumped into earlier on the street. She soon grew comfortable around him, even chatting familiarly. While the three waited, the door to the pawnshop was knocked on again. At Wood's signal, Rom nervously grabbed a new wooden club and cautiously opened the door. Standing outside was a beautiful young girl with silver hair. Seeing the girl, Rom hesitated for a moment. It was hard to imagine someone as well-dressed and graceful as Amelia coming to a place like this slum. However, Rom quickly remembered what Wood had said earlier and readied himself again. Wood had mentioned that the Bowel Hunter was a woman, and a very beautiful one at that. And it was strange for a girl like this to be in the slums alone. In other words, this silver-haired girl could very well be the Bowel Hunter. I'm sorry to bother you, but is this the pawnshop in the slums? Amelia asked politely, showing no fear in front of the giant Rom. Rom didn't answer her question, instead stepping aside while grabbing his wooden club, ready to knock her out as soon as she walked through the door. Felt, on the other hand, was ready with her short dagger, prepared for a fight. Wood, however, remained calmly seated, as if he already knew who the visitor was. The moment Amelia stepped inside, she spotted Wood and exclaimed in surprise. Wood. I didn't expect to find you here too. Hearing Amelia's words, Rom, who had been preparing to attack, froze in confusion and looked toward Wood. She's not the Bowel Hunter. She's the person you stole from. Wood clarified. Amelia's arrival, and the fact that she had reached the pawnshop before the Bowel Hunter, was unexpected for Wood. Subaru had said that only 3 people were killed by the Bowel Hunter, which meant that the future wasn't set in stone and could change based on different factors. According to Amelia, she had been wandering around the slums, lost, but she was drawn to the noise from Wood's earlier fight with Rom, which led her to the shop. When she saw Felt, Amelia immediately demanded that she return the stolen dragon crest. Felt, seeing that Amelia was inexperienced, claimed that since she had stolen the item, it now belonged to her. If Amelia wanted it back, she would have to buy it. Wood thought that if Amelia had any money on her, she might have actually paid for her stolen crest. Unfortunately, she didn't have a single coin. The crest was incredibly important to Amelia, but Felt only cared about money, so the two naturally began to fight. Without her companion Puck, a spirit who only remained active during the day, Amelia's strength was greatly diminished. Despite this, she was still stronger than Felt. However, with Rom's help and the cramped space of the pawnshop limiting Amelia's magic abilities, the fight ended in a stalemate. That is, until the final guest of the night arrived, causing both sides to halt their fight. The door opened once again, revealing a strikingly beautiful woman with a rare feature of glossy black hair, something seldom seen in this world. She wore a daring black dress with a plunging neckline, and her legs, wrapped in black stockings, peeked out from the high slit in her skirt. She was the epitome of grace and seduction, with her looks and figure easily scoring a solid 90. It was no wonder Subaru had that fearful yet fascinated look when talking about a Bowel Hunter. Her beauty alone could easily outshine 99% of the girls Subaru had known in his world. Although Amelia was more beautiful, Her figure couldn't compare, and her clothes weren't nearly as suggestive. If Wood had to choose between the two, he would likely pick the Bowel Hunter. Not because he was some sort of pervert, but, well, maybe because he admired her sense of fashion. As she stepped into the shop, her eyes scanned the room, taking in the number of people, more than she had expected. Then, she smiled. A smile that sent shivers down the spine. There was something unsettling about that smile. How wonderful. A handsome blonde man, a beautiful silver-haired girl, a giant old man, and a little thief. Looks like we have quite the variety here. I wonder, will your intestines be any different from one another? Originally, her plan was to use some small talk to get her hands on the dragon crest. But now that Amelia herself was here, she could skip straight to the fun part. After all, her goal was to strip Amelia of her right to the throne. Killing her would work just as well. Chapter 339, A Close Combat Mage. The moment the Bowel Hunter laid eyes on her targets, her once beautiful face twisted into a wild expression. She swiftly drew two kukri knives from behind her back and lunged toward Amelia and the others. There were 4 people in the pawnshop, and though the Bowel Hunter had already placed them all on her kill list, she decided to start with her main target, Amelia. Amelia had already expended a lot of her magical energy and physical stamina from her earlier fight with Felt. So when the Bowel Hunter charged at her, Amelia, lacking battle experience, was too slow to react. Though she managed to conjure a thin ice wall in front of her, the delicate barrier stood no chance against the killer's sharp blades. With a sound like shattering glass, Amelia's ice wall crumbled. Not only that, but her arm suffered a deep gash from the blade's sharp edge. The Bowel Hunter was nothing like Felt. The gap in their abilities was huge. In this cramped space, facing an inexperienced mage like Amelia, the Bowel Hunter was like a force of chaos. Clang! Just as the Bowel Hunter shattered Amelia's ice defense and swung her other blade toward Amelia's stomach, a water arrow hit the knife squarely, deflecting it from its path. Miss Bowel Hunter, there's been a gentleman waiting for you for quite some time, yet you ignore him to go after a young girl. Isn't that a bit cold-hearted? Wood's voice rang out. Ever since the Bowel Hunter had entered the room, Wood had been quietly observing her. In comparison to Felt and Amelia, who were clearly inexperienced, the Bowel Hunter was a genuine assassin. Her movements were smooth, lethal. In a world like Mushoku Tensei, she would probably rank among the sword saints. However, her skills didn't impress Wood as much as he had hoped. Sure, her black stockings and striking appearance were noteworthy, but in terms of power, she was nothing more than a warm-up for him. If Amelia knew how to fight properly, she might not win against the Bowel Hunter. But at least she wouldn't lose so easily. You know me? The Bowel Hunter took a step back, putting some distance between herself and the group. Her eyes now focused on Wood rather than Amelia. Are you one of my fellow hunters, or a relative of one of my past victims? To the Bowel Hunter, Wood had appeared to be nothing more than a handsome bystander. He hadn't radiated any danger, nor did he even carry a weapon. But after that water arrow deflected her blade, she couldn't afford to underestimate him any longer. She now ranked him as the most dangerous person in the room. Wood had shown her that he was also a mage, and not just any mage, but a highly skilled one. Unlike Amelia, who had great magical power but little experience, Wood's water arrow might have been simple, but it spoke volumes. For starters, there was the speed. The Bowel Hunter hadn't even noticed the magic until it struck her knife. Sure, it partly had to do with her dismissing him as a threat earlier, but that didn't change the fact that his casting speed was impressive. More importantly, his precision was exceptional. That water arrow was aimed directly at her knife, not just wildly shot in her direction. If he had aimed for her head, the outcome would have been fatal. No, I think this is the first time we've met. Wood replied with a casual tone. I came looking for you because I heard you're strong. I'm curious to see how my current strength compares in this world. The Bowel Hunter didn't waste time probing further. She swiftly drew another kukri from her thigh holster and charged at Wood. Whether he was a battle-crazed maniac, an old enemy, or simply another hunter didn't matter. From the beginning, her mission had been clear: everyone in this room had to die. Judging by Wood's lack of visible weapons and his earlier use of magic, the Bowel Hunter deduced that he was purely a mage. And when it came to mages, she knew exactly what to do. Get up close. No matter how powerful a mage might be, they couldn't match her speed and strength in close combat. As long as she was fast enough, she could disrupt his casting and strike before he had a chance to retaliate. In this tight space, a skilled assassin like herself had the upper hand over any mage. Confident in her plan, the Bowel Hunter closed the distance between her and Wood with just a few quick steps. But as she sprinted toward him, bracing herself for his counterattack, she was surprised to find that Wood remained completely calm, showing no sign of panic. Is this a trap? Seeing Wood's serene expression, A sense of unease flickered in her heart. But as an assassin, she knew that her only chance to defeat a powerful mage was to engage them in close quarters. Even if it was a trap, she had no other choice. Her 2Q crease glinted as she leaped toward Wood. She had already marked the perfect spots on his body to strike. Watching from the sidelines, Amelia wanted to help, but the Bowel Hunter was too fast, and Amelia's magic couldn't keep up. If she used a larger spell, she might hit Wood by accident, leaving her helplessly frustrated. Oh, that poor woman. Felt, on the other hand, seemed calm, having seen Wood's strength firsthand. To her, the Bowel Hunter was in for a rude awakening. After all, Wood had effortlessly knocked down the giant drum and captured Felt, despite her speed. Wood could probably pass for an elite knight in the kingdom. Felt thought. The Bowel Hunter has no idea what she's gotten herself into. Clang. Instead of sinking into their intended target, the assassin's Q crease were stopped midair by a blade of ice that had formed in Wood's hand. Though there was no trap waiting for her. The Bowel Hunter hadn't anticipated this. From his spellcasting speed, it was obvious that Wood was a formidable mage. But instead of using magic to attack, he had quickly conjured a stream of water in his hand, which had solidified into an ice blade. It's a shame I don't have a proper weapon on hand, but I suppose this will do for now. Wood said casually. As you can see, I'm a mage, but I specialize in close combat. With a flick of his ice blade, he sent the Bowel Hunter flying backward, her body unable to withstand the sheer force of his attack. The power in that single strike left the Bowel Hunter astonished. While she knew that women often lacked the raw physical strength of men, her years of training as an assassin had made her far stronger than most males. Yet, her dual-wielded strikes couldn't match the strength of Wood's single hand. Was this even a mage's body? The Bowel Hunter quickly regained her balance, using her agility to bounce off the ceiling and launch herself at Wood once more. But this time, Wood didn't just stand still. He pushed off the ground and charged toward her as well. The dimly lit pawnshop was suddenly filled with the sound of clashing steel, as sparks flew with each strike. While the Bowel Hunter had incredible speed and precision, she was clearly outmatched in both strength and agility. Despite this, her years of experience as an assassin allowed her to use the narrow space and dim lighting to her advantage. She bounced off the walls and ceiling, launching rapid attacks that, for a moment, made it seem as though she was fighting evenly with Wood. Of course, this was only from Amelia's perspective. In truth, Wood was holding back. He wasn't using the magic he had mastered in the Mushoku Tensei world, nor was he employing any of the 6 powers or haki. Aside from the ice blade in his hand, he was simply relying on pure swordsmanship. It wasn't that Wood enjoyed toying with his enemies, but he had just arrived in this world. Meeting someone with some skill, he wanted to test the limits of his own abilities. Clang. The clash of blades sent sparks flying once again. In a desperate move, the Bowel Hunter swung her leg in a roundhouse kick toward Wood's head. Unfortunately for her, though her legs were long and elegant, the kick itself lacked the necessary power. Wood easily caught her ankle with one hand, leaving her hanging helplessly, her skirt flipping up in the process. Then, with a single powerful motion, Wood tossed her across the room, slamming into the wall. The Bowel Hunter coughed up blood, and before she could recover, Wood swung his ice blade again, sending a crescent-shaped wave of sword energy straight toward her. For the first time, the Bowel Hunter felt the true fear of death looming over her. She immediately activated her blessing ability, throwing off her cloak to reveal a hidden cache of blades glinting in the dim light. In an instant, these blades formed a protective barrier in front of her, thanks to her blessing, which allowed her to control and manipulate them. Though her attire left much of her exposed. The Bowel Hunter had hidden weapons all over her body, and her blessing allowed her to control these blades like a living weapon. However, even with her blade barrier, the sword energy easily sliced through the knives, continuing its path toward her. The only reason she was able to dodge in time was because the barrier had bought her a brief moment. The ground was torn apart, the walls shattered, and the small pawnshop was split cleanly in two by the force of Wood's attack. Looking at the destruction around her, the Bowel Hunter felt a cold sweat drip down her back. This man had been holding back. Not only had he chosen not to use magic, but his swordsmanship alone was terrifying. That last strike. There were only a handful of knights in the nearby kingdoms who could manage something like that. If she had any desire to keep fighting before, it had now evaporated. Her target was right in front of her, but her life was more valuable than this job. She could always try again. But if she died here, well, there'd be no more intestines for her to slice open. After a moment of hesitation, she made up her mind to retreat. Clearly, she hadn't gathered enough intel for this mission. She had thought this backwater town would be an easy job, but who could have guessed a monster like Wood would appear out of nowhere? Truthfully, the Bowel Hunter couldn't believe that someone like him was an unknown figure. He didn't carry himself like a knight, but if he wasn't a fellow assassin, then he was probably a famous mercenary or adventurer. Chapter 340, The Unstoppable Sword Saint appears as expected. This fight has given me a good idea of my current strength. I think it's time to end this. Wood spoke, his tone casual but firm. The Bowel Hunter had already realized the vast difference in their abilities, and the thought of retreat had crossed her mind. However, the real question was, could she still escape? The ice blade in Wood's hand shimmered under the moonlight, growing even more crystalline with each swing. As he unleashed another arc of sword energy, much stronger than the previous one. It tore through the air toward the Bowel Hunter. The previously damaged pawnshop had already been split open by Wood's first strike, and now the assassin had more space to maneuver. But even with this increased freedom, she felt a deep sense of helplessness in the face of this speeding sword wave. Could she dodge it? The sheer speed and range of the strike made that almost impossible. Block it? Perhaps if her earlier blades were still intact, she could attempt a defense. But now, that seemed out of the question. As the crescent-shaped energy blade roared toward her, Wood himself paused in surprise. This latest attack was far stronger than he'd intended. By all accounts, his movements and the force behind this strike were identical to the first one. Yet somehow, this one had nearly doubled in power. It didn't take long for Wood to realize why. The Moonlight Blessing. This was one of the two blessings unique to the body he now inhabited. The Knight's glory enhanced his abilities as a knight, but the Moonlight Blessing was even more remarkable. Now that the roof of the pawnshop had been destroyed, he was bathed in moonlight, and the blessing had activated. While Wood hadn't yet fully explored the true extent of this blessing, the boost was undeniable. This second sword strike had at least 50% more power than the first. Unfortunately for the Bowel Hunter, she wasn't strong enough to serve as a proper test of this newfound power. Wood sighed inwardly, he'd have to find a more suitable opponent to properly gauge his abilities. As the crescent-shaped sword energy grew larger in her vision, the Bowel Hunter smiled bitterly, accepting her fate. If there was no way to block or escape, then there was little point in trying. But just as the energy blade was about to make contact with her body, a figure in white knight's armor appeared before her. In the blink of an eye, the figure drew their sword with lightning speed and effortlessly cleaved the incoming sword energy in two. The force of the blow scattered the energy, carving deep grooves into the ground, and sending dust and sand swirling into the air. My strike, enhanced by the Moonlight Blessing, was cut down. Wood couldn't help but smirk. I was just lamenting that the Bowel Hunter was too weak, and then a monster like you shows up. This world might not be as boring as I thought. The attack had been so fast that Felt and the others probably hadn't even registered what had just happened. But Wood had seen it clearly, right before his sword energy could reach the Bowel Hunter. A red-haired figure had appeared and sliced through his strike. Though Wood didn't know who this person was, his competitive spirit surged. With a powerful kick off the ground, he left a deep crater behind as he launched himself into the swirling dust. Meanwhile, the Bowel Hunter stared in disbelief at the red-haired knight standing before her. As a member of the Assassin's Guild, she was no stranger to being hunted, always lurking in the shadows. Knights, however, were shining symbols of virtue. Always admired, always respected. Why would a knight rescue her, a notorious killer? Before she could voice her confusion, the red-haired knight grabbed her and tossed her aside, as if she were no more than an obstacle. I've heard from Natsuki Subaru that there's a formidable assassin lurking in the slums. The knight said, his voice calm. But I didn't expect the opponent to be this strong. If my dragon sword is this eager, then this opponent must truly be worth my full attention. Just as the knight finished speaking, Wood burst through the dust, descending from above with his ice blade aimed directly at the knight. Sensing the danger, the knight lifted his sword, the dragon sword reed, to meet Wood's ice blade. The clash of their weapons caused the ground beneath them to crack, the force of the impact rippling outward in a massive shockwave. The dragon sword reed was known as the strongest sword in the world, a weapon passed down through generations of sword saints. It could only be wielded by those blessed with the sword saint's blessing. This sword had a mind of its own and only drew itself when faced with a worthy foe. If the opponent wasn't strong enough, the sword would refuse to be used, deeming the fight beneath it. But today, for the first time since acquiring the sword, the red-haired knight felt the dragon sword trembling with excitement. This was a first. As the wielder of the strongest sword ever passed down through the Astri family, the knight knew the dragon sword reed was far beyond the meager cuirass wielded by the Bowel Hunter. So when Wood's ice blade collided with a dragon sword, the sword was unaffected, but Wood's ice blade began to crack, fine spiderweb-like fractures spreading across it. Hyaki Yagio style, flame-fused sword dance. Wood had no idea who this knight was, but it was clear to anyone watching that this person was on a completely different level than the Bowel Hunter. This wasn't a battle to toy with anymore, so Wood decided to stop holding back and reveal his true strength. Flames erupted from the shattered remains of the ice blade in Wood's hand. Wait, fire. Coming from ice? The knight, Reinhard was taken aback. Just as he thought to push the attack, the ice blade shattered completely, and a roaring fireball exploded outward from where the blade had been. The fireball expanded rapidly, engulfing the area between the two warriors and sending waves of heat through the slums. Both Reinhard and Wood were consumed by the fiery blast. For a moment, the night sky above the slums was lit up by the brilliant flames, a beacon visible from miles away. Thankfully, Reinhard had anticipated the possibility of battle, and the civilians had already been evacuated from the area. The Bowel Hunter, now watching from a safe distance, realized why the knight had thrown her aside earlier. If she had remained where she stood, she would have been reduced to ashes. More importantly, she finally understood how much Wood had been holding back during their fight. If he had unleashed this level of magic from the start, she wouldn't have lasted 3 rounds. Though the flames raged fiercely, the two figures at the center of the explosion remained standing, seemingly unscathed by the deadly fire. The proof came moments later when 2 blasts of sword pressure tore through the flames, sending sparks flying as the ground split beneath them. Both warriors, Wood and Reinhard, were blown backward from the impact, emerging from the cloud of dust that had formed in the aftermath. The Bowel Hunter had already committed Wood's face to memory, branding him as someone she should never cross paths with again. As for the red-haired knight who had saved her, she finally realized who he was. Reinhard van Astrie. The name might be unfamiliar to the common folk, but to nobles, those in the royal capital, and the underground world, the name was legendary. He was the Sword Saint, the strongest knight in the world. Reinhard was often called the world's chosen one or the child of destiny. And for good reason. His power wasn't just the result of his talent and training, but also his blessings. As Wood knew, blessings were special abilities granted by the world itself. Those with a single blessing were already considered extraordinary. But Reinhard? According to the Assassin's Guild intel, the current Sword Saint possessed over 40 different blessings. Though not all of them were combat-related, that still made him an unrivaled monster. And what was even more terrifying, he could continue to acquire more blessings. Reinhard wasn't just blessed by the world, he was practically its favored child. Given that he belonged to the royal guard, there was no reason for someone like Reinhard to rescue a notorious assassin. The Bowel Hunter concluded that the knight had mistaken her for a victim and Wood for the enemy. After all, with her injuries, she definitely looked like the weaker side, and with Wood's menacing aura and ruthless demeanor, anyone would mistake him for a villain. And indeed, Reinhard had made exactly that assumption. After being separated from Wood earlier, Subaru had gone searching for help and, thanks to his incredible luck, ran into the strongest knight in the kingdom, Reinhard. When Subaru described the situation, Reinhard immediately realized the severity and rushed ahead, leaving Subaru behind. Upon arriving at the scene, he had witnessed Wood's attack on the Bowel Hunter. Faced with a helpless woman and a powerful assailant, Reinhard's instincts as a knight had kicked in. And so, Reinhard had assumed that Wood must be the killer Subaru had spoken of. As the dust settled, Wood and Reinhard had each retreated about 100 meters. The ice blade that Wood had conjured shattered into pieces, scattering across the ground. It seems like I'll need to make some adjustments to my plans. Using conjured ice blades works well against weaker opponents, but against someone of this level, they're not nearly enough. Sighing in frustration, Wood once again summoned an ice blade into his hand. But this time, as he grasped the newly formed blade, his arm pulsed with energy. A black sheen spread from his hand, covering the blade in a metallic, obsidian-like layer. The once translucent ice blade was now pitch black, gleaming under the moonlight. Looks like this world allows me to use hockey as well. It might not be on par with his sword, but at least it won't break as easily now. Chapter 341, The Sword Saint with over 40 blessings. After reinforcing his ice blade with armament hockey, Wood propelled himself forward at astonishing speed with a powerful kick. At the same moment, Reinhard also sprang into action. Clang! The blackened ice blade clashed with the dragon's sword reed, and the sheer force of the impact generated a massive storm that swept outward from the two of them. The ground beneath them couldn't withstand the intensity of their collision, and a deep fissure split open between them. But that was only the beginning. As soon as their weapons disengaged, Wood and Reinhard vanished from sight, only to reappear 100 meters away, once again locking blades in midair. With each clash of sword and blade, the very mana in the air seemed to tremble, causing the surrounding landscape to be torn apart with each blow. When Subaru finally arrived at the scene, he was initially overjoyed to see that Amelia, Felt, and the others were safe. But when his gaze shifted to Wood and Reinhard, whose battle was turning a once flat plain into a series of hills, his expression quickly turned to one of shock. What the hell are Wood and Reinhard doing? Why are they fighting each other? And where's the Bowel Hunter? According to the plan, Wood was supposed to hold off the Bowel Hunter while Subaru went to find the town guards to arrest her. But now, Wood and Reinhard, both supposed allies, were fighting each other. Subaru couldn't make sense of the situation. Do they have some kind of grudge against each other? Subaru, you found us. Is that knight your friend too? I think he might have misunderstood Wood. We need to stop them. If they keep going like this, things will get out of hand. Amelia, the half-elf, despite being over a century old, had only truly lived for 14 years, due to a long period of being frozen in ice. Now, seeing the situation spiral out of control, she instinctively turned to Subaru for help, her wide eyes pleading for guidance. Seeing Amelia look at him with such hope, Subaru's heart melted. Of course, he wanted to step up and show his beloved that he could handle this. But when he saw the battle between Wood and Reinhard, his initial confidence evaporated. Subaru, while wanting to help, realized there was no way he could intervene. The sheer scale of their battle was beyond anything he could handle. One misstep, and he'd be crushed. These guys. Are they serious? That knight said he was just an average swordsman, and Wood only mentioned being somewhat confident in his abilities. But this is insane. What am I supposed to do when they're carving up the ground like it's nothing? Subaru watched in disbelief as Wood's strike created a kilometer-long fissure in the ground, while Reinhard effortlessly shattered a boulder weighing several tons with a single swing of his sword. The absurdity of the situation hit him hard. When Subaru had first met Wood in the alleyway, he'd asked how strong he was. Wood's reply had been something along the lines of having a bit of confidence. Enough to handle a few small-time thugs. And Reinhard? When Subaru had encountered him earlier and asked how powerful he was, the knight had claimed to be no more than a humble swordsman. But now, watching these two titans tear apart a landscape with their strikes, Subaru couldn't help but feel like the real imposter here. The battle between Wood and Reinhard only intensified with time. What had initially been a visible clash of swords soon became too fast for even those watching to follow. Amelia, felt, and the others could no longer keep track of their movements. But despite the rapid pace of the battle, the clash of weapons continued to echo through the air, with each blow reshaping the terrain. Hyaki Yagio style, wind blade dance. Kama-Atachi. A powerful, green wind blade, capable of cutting through concrete, shot towards Reinhard, carried by a furious gale. After fighting Reinhard for so long, Wood was certain of one thing. Reinhard was the most formidable swordsman he had ever faced in any world. It wasn't just Reinhard's swordsmanship. His natural combat instincts and raw talent were astonishing. While he lacked extensive battle experience, Reinhard somehow always managed to evade Wood's attacks. This time, however, Wood had finally spotted an opening. His Kama-Atachi strike was timed perfectly, aimed to catch Reinhard as he landed, his body still in a vulnerable stance. The green wind blade sped toward Reinhard, and while Wood didn't expect it to defeat him outright, he believed it would at least injure the knight and give him a slight advantage. But to Wood's shock, his well-aimed attack barely grazed Reinhard's body, flying harmlessly past him. The blade continued on, carving a 100-meter-long trench in the earth and slicing off the top of a distant hill before disappearing into the horizon. Standing unharmed, Reinhard looked back at Wood, who now wore a knowing expression. So that's one of your blessings, isn't it? With multiple worlds of combat experience, Wood knew that his blade couldn't have simply missed. It had been avoided, almost as if the attack had been repelled by some unseen force. Reinhard smiled. You're correct. It's one of my blessings, called the blessing of evasion. Any long-range attack will always miss its mark. A knight through and through, Reinhard believed in fairness in battle. Although Wood was his opponent, Reinhard felt no need to hide the truth about his abilities. Wood's expression hardened. So, the reason you were able to walk out of that explosion earlier without a scratch. That was another one of your blessings, right? At the beginning of their fight, Wood had unleashed a fire-based attack that should have at least scorched Reinhard, yet the knight had emerged unscathed. Wood now realized that this too must have been due to one of Reinhard's blessings. You're correct again. Reinhard replied. That was thanks to the blessing of fire resistance. It reduces the power of any fire-based magic to just 20% of its original strength. Wood raised an eyebrow. Reinhard was a double blessing user, just like him. But was it really just coincidence that his two best chances of inflicting harm had both been negated? You're the strongest opponent I've ever faced. Reinhard said earnestly. In fact, it's the first time I've seen the dragon sword read so excited. I want to fight you fairly, so I won't hide anything. Wood's mind spun. Reinhard spoke casually about his several blessings. As if having multiple blessings was normal. Reinhard, oblivious to Wood's stunned silence, continued. The blessing of the sword song is my most important one. It lets me wield the dragon sword reed and unlock its full potential. He went on to list his other blessings. The blessing of unfailing arrows ensured his ranged attacks never missed. The blessing of magic immunity nullified all curses and status effects. The blessing of wind absorbed 80% of wind-based magic, and the blessing of earth reduced earth-based magic by the same amount. There were more: the blessing of water reflection, which deflected water-based magic, and the blessing of darkness and light, which weakened dark magic by 80% and transferred 80% of light-based magic onto another opponent. Then there was the blessing of precognition, which allowed Reinhard to predict an enemy's moves, and the blessing of first strike, guaranteeing that Reinhard's first attack in any fight would land. There were blessings for almost every circumstance, and Reinhard rattled them off as if it were perfectly normal to possess such abilities. But the one that shocked Wood most was the blessing of the Phoenix. A blessing that granted Reinhard the power to resurrect once, and if used, he would receive the extended Phoenix blessing, allowing him to revive indefinitely. An ability that essentially made Reinhard immortal. Wood was speechless. He had once thought the heroes and protagonists of other worlds were absurdly overpowered, but Reinhard's blessings took things to a whole new level. Immunity to nearly all forms of magic, resistance to environmental changes, buffs in any weather condition, and unlimited revives. It was as if he had stumbled into a story where the protagonist had become an unstoppable force. The sheer number of your abilities is staggering, Wood muttered. Just hearing about them would crush most people's will to fight. But no opponent is truly invincible. There's always a weakness, and even if magic is diminished, it's not completely ineffective. Despite his astonishment, Wood wasn't about to give up. He had faced foes just as powerful before, like the Dragon God, who could destroy continents and bend time and space itself. Wood had fought beings like that without hesitation, and now, Reinhard was no different. Emperor-level ice magic. Ice Age. As Wood unleashed a torrent of magical energy, the temperature around them plummeted, and a bone-chilling wind swept across the battlefield. Even Felt and Subaru, standing at a distance, shivered as the icy wind blew past them. "It's here!" Amelia exclaimed. "Such powerful magic! Even the spirits in the air are restless. What kind of person is Wood, to have such swordsmanship and this level of magic?" The freezing wind howled, and when Felt and Subaru opened their eyes again, they were met with a sight that left them utterly speechless. The once barren plain had transformed into a vast, frozen tundra. 1,000 miles of ice stretching as far as the eye could see. Subaru, his breath visible in the frigid air, could hardly believe what he was seeing. "I knew this was a different world. But this is beyond anything I could have imagined." Chapter 342, The possibility of gaining the Sword Saint's blessing. Ice-based magic falls under the water attribute, so Wood's magic would still be 80% nullified by Reinhard. However, even though the damage caused by magic would only be 20% of its original strength, if the magic itself is powerful enough, it can still inflict significant harm on Reinhard. Moreover, Wood's magic wasn't a direct attack, but rather one meant to deal sustained damage and create a terrain advantage. With a powerful stomp, Wood shattered the ice beneath his feet, and the frozen surface cracked like glass, spiderweb fissures spreading rapidly. The strong Rick oil launched Wood's body forward like a bullet, closing the distance between him and Reinhard with impressive speed. Given that Reinhard possessed the blessing of evasion, making long-range attacks futile, Wood knew from the start that keeping his distance offered no chance of victory. After all, ranged attacks wouldn't work. With only 20% of the magic's effect reaching Reinhard, Wood's best shot at wounding him lay in close-quarters combat with sword strikes and physical force. Even Emperor-level ice magic, powerful enough to freeze 4 emperors, was nearly ineffective against Reinhard. While Reinhard would feel the cold and sustain some injuries, his blessing of magic immunity meant that effects like freezing or frostbite were negated. As Wood dashed toward him, conjuring 2 black ice blades at lightning speed, Reinhard grasped his dragon sword reed and prepared to meet Wood head-on. Saint-level ice magic, Frost Dragon's fangs. But just as Reinhard prepared to move, he felt a sudden tremor from the ice beneath his feet. Sharp ice spikes shot up from the ground at the exact moment Reinhard began to act, aiming directly for him. Thanks to his extraordinary reflexes and intuition, Reinhard easily dodged the spikes, although they had caught him off guard. Despite successfully evading the attack, Reinhard's face showed no relief. If anything, a flicker of surprise crossed his features. "It seems that the blessing of telepathy gave you insight into my thoughts. But even so, knowing my plan doesn't mean you can prevent my attack." Although Reinhard dodged the iced spikes, careful observation would reveal that his movements had been completely restricted by the crisscrossing spikes. Indeed, Reinhard's blessing of magic immunity prevented him from being controlled by any magical status effects, but it didn't protect him from physical terrain limitations. From the very beginning, Wood hadn't planned on using the ice spikes to injure Reinhard. His goal was to limit Reinhard's mobility with the strategically placed ice. Hyaki Yagio style, dual blade technique. Blood Demon Slash. As Reinhard realized his movements were constrained, Wood had already closed the distance, appearing directly in front of him. Conqueror's hockey crackled around Wood's twin blades, causing red arcs of energy to burst forth, further empowered by armament hockey. With Reinhardt's mobility restricted, he had no choice but to raise his dragon sword reed in a hasty defense against Wood's oncoming strike. Boom! The black ice blades collided with the dragon sword reed, sending tremors through the earth. The frozen ground surrounding them cracked like a spider's web, fissures radiating outward from the point of impact. This time, Wood hadn't used any finesse or technique. Just raw physical strength combined with the amplification of Conqueror's hockey. His strike was as powerful as when he had fought the dragon god. Even with his immense strength, Reinhardt had only managed to raise his sword in defense at the last second, while Wood's strike had been fully charged and executed. The result was inevitable. The moment Wood's twin blades struck, Reinhardt's arms buckled under the pressure, his feet shattering the ice beneath him as they were driven deep into the ground. Just as the dragon sword reed was forced down onto Reinhardt's shoulder, Wood followed up with a swift roundhouse kick aimed at Reinhardt's face. But even in this tight spot, Wood's kick failed to connect. Reinhardt, in a desperate maneuver, drove his dragon sword reed into the ground and raised his free hand to block the incoming blow. Unfortunately for Reinhardt, despite his quick defense, Wood's armament hockey charged kick was too powerful to be fully stopped. A sickening crack echoed as Reinhardt's elbow fractured under the force of the kick, sending him flying backward in a shockwave that left a crater in the ground. Wood's twin black ice blades had shattered into shards after the powerful clash with the dragon sword reed. Yet, instead of stopping, Wood immediately followed up by using instant transmission and moonwalk, rapidly closing in on Reinhardt, who was still hurtling through the air from the impact. Reinhardt, using the momentum of his fall, had hoped to regain control and counterattack upon landing. But before he could do so, he saw Wood's hand appear in his vision, growing larger by the second. Reinhardt had no time to react as Wood's hand grabbed his head and slammed it into the ground, dragging him across the icy field for several hundred meters. But that wasn't the end. As Reinhardt felt Wood gathering magical energy in his hand, his blessing of telepathy allowed him to sense what was coming next. Your blessings may grant immunity to most magical damage, but as long as the magic is strong enough, 20% can still do plenty of harm. And magic doesn't have to be used at a distance, after all. Saint-level fire magic, Crimson Nova. In Reinhardt's shocked gaze, a blinding red light flared in Wood's hand. Moments later, a pillar of scorching fire erupted into the night sky, illuminating the area as it incinerated the ice and turned the ground within a 100-meter radius into scorched earth. As the fiery pillar faded, smoke billowed out, blanketing the surroundings. The ground now bore a massive crater, its edges glowing red-hot like molten lava. Wood swiftly retreated from the blast zone, dodging a sword slash from Reinhardt as he reappeared, wearing a bitter smile as he glanced at his opponent. "You've got to be kidding me. How did you dodge that one? None of your previous blessings should have worked in that situation. So, mind telling me how you avoided my fire spell?" Both Wood and Reinhardt looked worse for wear. Their clothes were charred and tattered from the intense heat of the flames. Even Wood, the spell's caster, couldn't escape the proximity of the explosion unscathed. While he had fared better than Reinhardt, it was clear that both had taken significant damage. If it weren't for the healing magic array inscribed on Wood's body, and his quick activation of its effects, he might have suffered worse. Reinhardt's blessing of fire resistance had indeed reduced the fire magic's impact by 80%, and this was why Wood hadn't used an Emperor-level fire magic. If the spell's power had been too overwhelming, he risked severely injuring himself. Moreover, Wood had been cautious not to kill Reinhardt outright. If Reinhardt's blessing of the Phoenix activated, he'd resurrect at full strength, and the battle would start all over again. Wood's strategy was to critically injure Reinhardt and then seal him or incapacitate him in some other way. Yet, despite Wood's best efforts, Reinhardt had survived relatively unscathed, and even managed to counterattack. It was clear that Reinhardt had been hiding something. Another blessing, perhaps? Looking at Reinhardt's honest and noble expression, Wood had a hard time believing the knight would resort to trickery. Wood's skills as a swordsman allowed him to gauge Reinhardt's character through their duel, and Reinhardt didn't seem like someone who would play dirty. Reinhardt, sensing Wood's confusion, offered an explanation. Under normal circumstances, everything would have played out just as Wood predicted. But just as Wood grabbed Reinhardt's face to unleash his magic, Reinhardt had gained a new blessing. The blessing of combat magic immunity, which made him immune to any magic delivered through physical contact. In other words, the world had seemingly granted Reinhardt the exact blessing he needed to survive. This was the true meaning of being the world's chosen son. Reinhardt wasn't cheating. His existence itself was a cheat code. Reinhardt's core blessing, the one that lay at the heart of his power, was called the blessing of the world's love. It was arguably the most powerful blessing in existence, and for good reason. The world's love allowed Reinhardt to acquire any blessing he needed, whenever he needed it. Even without blessings, Reinhardt's innate abilities made him the strongest in the world. When he got serious, the mana in the air would bend to his will. While Reinhardt couldn't use magic himself, even elemental spirits would be drawn to him, with even the great spirits falling under his influence. It was thanks to this blessing that Reinhardt could gain new blessings at will. After explaining how he'd escaped death, Reinhardt tightened his grip on the dragon sword reed, preparing for the next round of their battle. But Wood, exhausted from the fight, simply raised his hands in surrender. The battle had gone on long enough, and Wood had learned all he needed to know about his current strength. Continuing would be pointless. While he still had his divine heart technique, using it would mean burning his own life force, and doing so in a sparring match seemed foolish. Besides, even if he used the divine heart, the chances of defeating Reinhardt were slim. The reality was clear. Wood, while powerful, was still outmatched by Reinhardt, whose abilities transcended even the most overpowered of beings. Reinhardt's blessings were created on the spot. How could anyone compete with that? Long-range attacks were ineffective, magic was almost useless, and now even magic applied through physical contact was nullified. If this fight continued, Wood feared that Reinhardt might unlock some blessing of sword immunity and become impervious to even his sword strikes. Furthermore, Wood had known from the start that Reinhardt wasn't his enemy. He recognized the knight's uniform and knew Reinhardt had been summoned by Subaru as backup. So why had Wood fought him in the first place? Part of it was that Wood wanted to test his own strength in this world. But there was another reason. One tied to the all-world life simulator. As everyone knew, the power Wood gained in each simulation would carry over into his body in the world of One Piece. In addition to that permanent boost, Wood would be given a chance to select one random reward from 3 choices at the end of each simulation. From experience, Wood knew that the rewards offered depended on the people he encountered in each world. The stronger the individuals he interacted with or fought against, the higher the quality of the rewards. That was why Wood had challenged Reinhardt from the beginning. The moment he laid eyes on him, Wood could sense it. This man was absurdly strong. Chapter 343, Wood, Become My Loyal Dog. Now that Wood had already come into contact with Reinhardt, and even fought a battle, it was entirely up to fate whether the final reward selection would offer something useful. If given the choice, Wood would naturally want the absurdly powerful blessing of the world's love. If that was too much to ask for, then getting the blessing of the Phoenix wouldn't be a bad option either. Of course, all of this was just wishful thinking. What he actually received in the end depended entirely on luck. Are you stopping here? But you haven't lost yet. Are you really going to let me arrest you just like that? Seeing Wood raise his hands in surrender, Reinhardt felt a little disappointed. It had been ages since he encountered someone as strong as Wood. Even though Wood was a notorious killer, Reinhardt couldn't deny that Wood was one of the strongest opponents he had ever faced. Arrest me? I think you've misunderstood something here. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I stopped a killer from committing murder today, and instead of rewarding me with a Good Citizen award, you want to arrest me? What kind of logic is that? Reinhardt's mind short-circuited, and his face showed utter confusion. So, when you said to leave it to you and I'd just need to show up later, this is what you meant? Now that the fight between Wood and Reinhardt had stopped, Subaru finally got a chance to chime in. After listening to Felt's explanation earlier, Subaru realized that Wood had almost dealt with the Bowel Hunter, but Reinhardt's sudden interference caused everything to spiral into this mess. So, you're saying that you're not the Bowel Hunter? Reinhardt finally pieced together the situation and asked awkwardly. Of course he's not the Bowel Hunter. The Bowel Hunter is a sexy lady in black stockings. The one you saved earlier? She's long gone by now. If Subaru had known that Wood was this strong, he wouldn't have bothered seeking Reinhardt's help. Night among nights, my foot. Reinhardt hadn't been any help at all. In fact, his interference let the real killer escape. Indeed, the Bowel Hunter had fled long ago. She had initially planned to wait on the sidelines and swoop in at the last moment. But as the battle between Wood and Reinhardt escalated, with ice plains and craters forming left and right, she quickly decided to retreat. The reason was simple, she realized both of them were absolute monsters. Even if one of them lost, the other could easily finish her off while injured. With the misunderstanding cleared up, continuing the fight was no longer an option. Though Reinhardt regretfully invited Wood to spar again someday, Wood tactfully ignored the offer. Felt, caught stealing, was taken away by Reinhardt, though Amelia paid the fee that had been promised by the Bowel Hunter for her services. The reason was that Felt wasn't using the money for herself but to support the orphans in the slums. Interestingly, it was another cute girl named Rem who paid on Amelia's behalf. Rem had blue, shoulder-length hair with bangs covering one of her eyes. She wore a black and white maid outfit and, though she had a baby face, her chest was even more impressive than Amelia's. Grateful for Wood and Subaru's help in retrieving her insignia, Amelia warmly invited them to her residence. Subaru, having long dreamt of getting close to Amelia, eagerly accepted the invitation. Wood, on the other hand, wasn't particularly interested in romancing girls. And upon learning that Reinhard was a member of the so-called Royal Guard, his desire to visit the royal capital grew even stronger. Wood's refusal left Amelia a bit disappointed. From the earlier battle, she could tell that Wood was a powerful mage, and she had wanted to ask him some questions. But since Wood had pressing matters, she couldn't insist. Both Subaru and Rem, however, let out a sigh of relief when Wood declined the invitation. For Subaru, it was because Wood was simply too impressive. He feared that if Wood stayed around, it would make his own role as the protagonist feel even more insignificant. Winning over Amelia would become exponentially harder. As for Rem, her reasoning was different. As a member of the Ana clan, she could clearly sense Wood's strength and danger. Bringing such a powerful stranger to the Roswell mansion could pose unknown risks to everyone there. She was just a maid and didn't have much say in the matter. Since Wood had helped Amelia, she couldn't refuse the invitation. Now that Wood had turned it down on his own, it was the best possible outcome. As for Subaru, well, Rem didn't see him as a threat at all. Despite his thick stench of the witch's miasma, his combat ability was non-existent. She could easily take on 10 Sabaris at once without breaking a sweat. Don't go getting yourself killed so easily again, or I won't hesitate to seal you away for 100 years. These were Wood's parting words to Subaru, who visibly shuddered upon hearing them. After meeting a beautiful girl and getting invited to her home, Subaru was starting to feel good about this new world. It would be even better, of course, if he were the only protagonist around. Wood's final words didn't sound like a joke to Subaru. But as a modern-day shut-in thrown into a fantasy world where his combat ability was laughable, Subaru knew he couldn't avoid death. Unfortunately, things never seemed to go his way. After parting ways, Reinhard took Felt back to the capital. He suspected that Felt, with her blessing of the wind, wasn't as simple as she seemed. Subaru followed Amelia back to the Roswell mansion. Wood's original plan was to head for the capital of the Dragon Kingdom as well, but after Reinhard and the others left, he chose a different path. At a tavern in one of the towns of the Lunica Kingdom, the recently escaped Bowl Hunter, Elsa, was in the room, tending to her wounds after the deadly encounter. As she cleaned her injuries, Elsa's hands trembled. This mission had left her shaken in a way she hadn't expected. In the past, whenever Elsa failed a mission, she would retreat like a snake, biding her time for revenge. But this time was different. Both Wood and Reinhard were terrifying monsters, and Elsa couldn't see any hope for vengeance. On top of that, Elsa wasn't even sure how she would explain this failure to her mother. She was certain that some form of punishment awaited her. I wonder how it ended. I can only hope that monster who made me fail was killed by Reinhard. As a killer, Elsa had spent her career toying with her prey, relishing in the moment she could rip out their intestines and watch them scream in agony. But now, for the first time, she was the one who had been toyed with. It was clear to anyone that, based on the power Wood had shown in his fight against Reinhard, he could have defeated her easily. The fact that he hadn't meant he was deliberately humiliating her in that pawnshop. You're disappointed, aren't you? Unfortunately, I didn't defeat that cheat of a man, but he didn't kill me either. In fact, after my fight with Reinhard, I've sustained some injuries. Maybe now's your chance to get your revenge? What do you say? A strange voice interrupted Elsa's thoughts, startling her. But her killer instincts kicked in, and Elsa quickly composed herself, grabbing a curved blade from the table and turning to face the direction of the voice. To her surprise, the figure sitting on her bed was none other than the man who had haunted her like a nightmare. Wood. He was sitting there, casually watching her, his gaze unabashedly fixed on her body. Having removed her clothes to clean her wounds, Elsa was now standing nearly naked in front of him. Have you seen enough? Did you chase me all the way here just to gawk at my body? Though Elsa felt uneasy under Wood's bold gaze, she didn't bother covering herself or putting down her weapon to retrieve her clothes. It would be foolish to prioritize modesty over survival. In a dangerous situation, her weapon gave her the only sense of security, not some discarded clothes. You're even more impressive than I thought. I guess professional killers really are on a different level. But tell me, do you really think that weapon of yours would keep you safe if I wanted to kill you? After a brief moment of hesitation, Elsa's tense posture relaxed. Slowly, she lowered her curved blade and even turned her back on Wood, calmly and methodically putting her clothes back on. Indeed, under normal circumstances, lowering her weapon in a situation like this would be incredibly foolish. But Wood was different. As he had said, facing a monster of his caliber, whether she had a weapon or not didn't really make much of a difference. Besides, if Wood had intended to kill her, she wouldn't have had a chance to speak in the first place. And if he did intend to kill her, at least now she could die with some dignity, fully clothed. As her well-defined figure was gradually covered by her black attire, Wood cursed his earlier decision to posture. Now he'd lost the opportunity to fully appreciate the sight. Keeping things as they were, they could have still had a conversation, couldn't they? You've chased me all this way, but you haven't made a move. Surely you didn't come just to see me like this? Are you here to ask who hired me? Or maybe you plan to capture me and claim a reward? Now that she was certain Wood didn't plan on killing her, Elsa felt more at ease. Leaning against a wall, she relaxed her posture, displaying her figure with a lazy, nonchalant expression. Wood had tracked Elsa down by following the magical residue left on her during their previous encounter, where his magic had wounded her. No, I'm not here to kill you or interrogate you about who hired you. Frankly, I don't care about that. I'm not really close with Amelia and her group. Go ahead, finish cleaning your wounds if you'd like. Pretend I'm not here. We can talk after you're done. Despite Wood's seemingly serious declaration, Elsa didn't make any move to continue tending to her wounds. She simply stared at him in silence. Finally, realizing there was no more opportunity for him to enjoy the sight, Wood got to the point. Alright, to be honest, I tracked you down because I'm interested in this assassination organization you work for. Someone like you isn't working alone, right? There's an organization behind you, isn't there? My question is, do I have a chance to become one of you? No, more accurately, do I have a shot at becoming your boss? Yes, that was Wood's true purpose for chasing down the Bowel Hunter, Elsa. Since this world had an underground network, Wood naturally wanted to resume his old line of work. Back in the Mushoku Tensei world, Wood had suffered from a lack of information. It had led him to being outplayed by Hitagami, not even knowing who his enemy really was. If he had gathered information beforehand and understood who Hitagami and Orsted were, he wouldn't have ended up in such a mess. So, Wood had learned his lesson. His goal hadn't changed. He still planned to become a knight in the Dragon Kingdom. But that didn't mean he couldn't also operate as a leader of the underground, just like in the world of One Piece. The underworld might be dark and chaotic, but it was also the most real part of any world. It was the best source of information and the best way to grasp the hidden truths and shadows of the world. Wood's goal was simple: he wanted to take over the assassination organization and return to his old ways. Money wasn't the main motivation this time. The real prize was the intelligence network that these assassins could offer, feeding him crucial information about this world. Chapter 344, Is the Assassin a Lie? You want to become an assassin in the underground world and even aim to be the leader of an assassination organization? Hearing Wood's intentions, Elsa was clearly taken aback. To her, the idea of someone like Wood, with his strength and status, aspiring to become an assassin was utterly unheard of. Those who lurked in the shadows of the underground world were like rats in a sewer, despised by society. Many were forced into such a life with no other options, and by the time they wanted to wash their hands of it, they found themselves too stained with blood to find a place of redemption. Someone like Wood, whose background was clean and whose abilities were formidable, could easily become a knight, a profession most people could only dream of. Yet here he was, saying he wanted to enter the underground world and take over an assassination organization. This was something Elsa had never expected. Wood, what? Do you think I'm not qualified? Or do you believe your current leader is so strong that I won't be able to defeat them? Elsa, no, I'm just surprised that someone like you would want to join the underground world and become one of us. Hearing Elsa's response, Wood understood what she meant and chuckled. You're not assuming I'm some sort of justice warrior, are you? Besides, the underground world doesn't necessarily mean it's all darkness. Just like the nobles in their fancy clothes, they aren't necessarily good people either. Elsa was visibly shocked by Wood's words. From his attire, he looked like someone of noble birth. And having dealt with nobles from various kingdoms, Elsa knew all too well what sort of creatures they were. Yet Wood, standing before her, gave her the impression that this nobleman was somehow different. Enough small talk. Are you going to take me to meet the leader of your organization, or should I just kill you and find another assassin to ask for directions? I don't have time to waste. Elsa wasn't someone who necessarily had to be killed, but once Wood took over the assassination organization, she would become part of it, and he didn't need disobedient subordinates. I can take you to our leader, but don't expect me to help. Actually, I don't think you'd need my help anyway. Sensing the killing intent emanating from Wood, which was more than just empty threats, Elsa finally relented. But the real reason she agreed was because of Wood's earlier words. Being shrouded in darkness didn't necessarily make someone evil, and those who basked in light weren't always righteous. Only fools and weaklings cared about such distinctions. The wise and strong wielded their weapons for their own beliefs. Elsa was born in the northern kingdom of Gusteko, with no parents to care for her, surviving by drinking muddy water. One day, while stealing from a shop, she was caught by the owner, who stripped off her clothes with the intent of taking advantage of her. Elsa had grabbed a shard of glass and sliced open his stomach. That was her first kill, and from there, she had no choice but to enter the underground world and become an assassin. Her childhood experiences had twisted her, giving rise to her obsession with slicing open her victims' stomachs, which earned her the infamous title of the Bowel Hunter. At first, joining the assassination organization had been out of necessity, but over time, the lifestyle consumed her, and Elsa's personality became more and more warped, eventually growing into the bloodthirsty killer she was today. She had begun to enjoy the warmth of blood and intestines, developing a perverse fascination with them. As the years passed, Elsa came to view herself as one of the sewer rats of the underworld. But if Wood became the new leader of the assassination organization, maybe he would change things for the better. At the very least, it would be more interesting than things were now. Before I take you to meet the leader of the assassination organization, I want to introduce you to someone else first. She's also a member of the organization. Wood didn't object to Elsa's request. After all, there was no rush to become the leader of the underground world just yet. Elsa had decent skills and was one of the top assassins in the organization. If she was willing to follow his orders, Wood didn't mind giving her some perks. After all, there weren't many black stocking-wearing ladies like her in this world, and even fewer as attractive as her. The next day, Elsa checked out of the inn after bandaging her wounds. When paying the bill, the lecherous innkeeper ogled Elsa's curvaceous body before clicking his tongue in envy at Wood. It was obvious the innkeeper saw Wood as a corrupt noble out having fun with a beautiful older woman. Given Wood's appearance and aura, it was hard to imagine anyone not believing he was a noble. What a shame, the innkeeper thought, that such a beautiful woman in black stockings had been ruined for a few measly coins by a spoiled noble. Elsa, noticing the innkeeper's indecent gaze, tightened her grip on the curved blade hidden under her cloak. She was ready to rip out his intestines to see what they looked like. But before she could act, Wood grabbed her wrist. Don't cause unnecessary trouble if you still want to be one of those sewer rats. Wood's icy glare made Elsa feel like she had been plunged into freezing water, and her maniacal expression quickly faded, replaced by calm. Wood sighed, tossed a silver coin onto the counter, and led Elsa out of the inn. He had figured it out by now. Elsa was clearly a problem child. Her traumatic childhood had warped her into a psychopath who couldn't help but want to gut people she didn't like. Once they left the inn, Elsa reverted to her usual seductive demeanor, a stark contrast to the crazed look she had worn moments before. If he hadn't seen her unhinged side firsthand, she could have easily passed as a normal person. After leaving the inn, Wood and Elsa traveled for 2 days. During this time, Elsa tried more than once to kill random passers-by and pull out their intestines, but each time, Wood stopped her. Of course, Wood didn't always intervene. When Elsa targeted abusive nobles or tyrants, Wood simply stood by and watched. However, Elsa's methods were always excessively brutal, leaving the scene so bloody that Wood often lost his appetite. Over these 2 days, Elsa found herself growing more comfortable in Wood's presence. Because of her traumatic past and the orders from Mother, Elsa often killed without purpose. But after each murder, she would sometimes sink into deep regret. Her twisted personality meant that whenever she slipped into a frenzy, it was as if a switch had been flipped, and she couldn't control herself. She had once believed that she would forever be a bloodthirsty executioner. But since meeting Wood, Elsa felt like she had begun to change. Wood's presence was like a limiter. Whenever she was about to lose control, his cold gaze could instantly bring her back to her senses. And his principles were clear. He only stopped her from killing those who didn't deserve to die. This feeling was new to Elsa. It was a balance. She could still feel the warmth of intestines while avoiding the regret and guilt of killing innocent people. And with every time Wood stopped her, Elsa felt like she was slowly learning to control her urges. After killing yet another bloated, pig-like slave trader and extracting his intestines, Elsa sighed contentedly. Meanwhile, Wood, who had watched the entire event unfold, looked displeased. So, where exactly is this person you're leading me to? I get the feeling you're deliberately taking me on a long detour. If it's that far away, we should have just ridden Drake's from the start. After releasing the women and children captured by the slave trader, Wood glared at Elsa, clearly irritated. He felt certain that she was toying with him. You're imagining things. The location of Melly's hideout is just remote, so I'm not too familiar with the way. And crossing the forest on Drake's would have disturbed the magical beasts, so walking was the safer option. Elsa sounded so convincing, yet in truth, she was lying through her teeth. She was indeed leading Wood in circles, dragging out their journey on purpose. It wasn't that Elsa had any ulterior motive or desire to betray Wood. Rather, during these past few days with him, Elsa had found a new sense of purpose in life. The thanks she received from the freed children and women made her feel like she had been redeemed. Among those young girls, Elsa saw a reflection of her younger self. Her past could not be undone, but her present offered a chance at redemption. As for the person they were searching for, her name was Melly Portrait, and she was also a member of the assassination organization. However, she was barely older than the children they had just saved. Melly, a girl with sky blue hair tied into a ponytail, was no more than 12 years old. Her childhood wasn't much better than Elsa's. Abandoned in a forest as a child, Melly had been raised by magical beasts due to her unique constitution, living among them until Elsa rescued her during a mission and brought her to serve Mother. Mother was not their actual mother but rather the leader of their assassination organization. Having been raised by beasts and later taught by someone as twisted as Elsa, it was no wonder Melly's personality was complicated. Melly idolized Elsa, admiring her for surviving under Mother's rule while remaining strong. She blindly emulated Elsa's way of life, mimicking her speech and developing a killer's mindset. She was like a child, still searching for her identity, trying to imitate someone she looked up to. Elsa's hope was that Wood could change Melly for the better. In Elsa's mind, she was a lost cause. But Melly was different. She was just starting her journey as an assassin. Melly's personality was shaped by her environment. She was still at a stage where she could be saved. If she could escape Mother's control, Melly might have a chance at a normal life. Chapter 345, Conqueror's Hockey. In another world, Melly had always idolized Elsa, and Elsa's completion rate for tasks was extremely high. Subaru Natsuki's previous boasting led Melly to mistakenly believe that Elsa's failure this time was largely due to Subaru. What Melly didn't expect, though, was that just when she was about to succeed, an unexpected individual appeared. Not only did this person see through her plan to attack Subaru but also recognized the danger hidden in the little dog she carried. Since her identity had already been exposed, Melly dropped her innocent facade, her previously naive expression now replaced by a cold one. As she blew her whistle, the surrounding forest around Arlem village began to stir with large, looming shadows surrounding the entire village. Melly Portrait, despite being only 12 years old, possessed a special blessing. A miasma-like aura swirled around her, giving her the ability to control magical beasts. Though there were limits to both quality and quantity, if she was serious, commanding 100 or so beasts wouldn't be an issue. After Elsa's failure and escape, Melly had been hiding in this village, waiting for her opportunity. Their mission was to prevent Amelia from reaching the royal capital to participate in the selection ceremony. Upon learning that this village was part of Roswell's territory and that his mansion's people frequently came here for supplies, Melly devised a series of plans. First, she tampered with the barrier surrounding the village, allowing magical beasts to enter. Then she caused various disturbances to lure Amelia into checking the barrier, giving Melly a chance to eliminate her. Mother was a terrifying figure. Elsa's previous failure had already set them back, and if Melly failed this time, both she and Elsa could be hunted down by their organization. Although the silver-haired half-elf hadn't shown up as expected, she was still content with the arrival of Subaru, who had interfered with Elsa's mission. To prevent her plan from being thwarted and to avenge Elsa, Melly decided to make Subaru the next victim. However, before her plan could fully begin, it was already disrupted, leaving Melly in a foul mood. As the shadows in the forest drew closer, Rem instantly transformed into her uniform, a single horn protruding from her head, and she wielded her massive morning star. Melly, I advise you not to make a move on him. This guy is a real monster. The magical beasts you're controlling might not even count as toys in his eyes. Seeing Melly preparing to unleash the magical beasts, Elsa finally stepped out of the shadows. After spending several days with Wood, Elsa had a better understanding of his character. Though he wasn't a pure villain, he was definitely no saint. As long as no one provoked him, everything would be fine. But once someone set him off, Wood wouldn't care who his target was. Melly's plan to slaughter the entire village had clearly hit a nerve with him. So, to prevent Melly from being killed by Wood before she even understood the situation, Elsa had no choice but to step forward and explain. Elsa, I'm so glad you're okay. If we work together, we can still complete the mission. That way, we won't have to worry about Mother hunting us down. Melly didn't know who Wood was. When Subaru had told his tales of heroism, he hadn't mentioned Wood's presence to boost his own glory. Melly, I'm here to tell you something important. I'm planning to leave the organization. As your partner and someone who has known you for some time, I'm here to ask if you want to come with me. At the sight of the Bowel Hunter, bad memories began flooding back into Subaru's mind. While Subaru trusted in Wood's strength, he couldn't ignore the fact that Wood now seemed to be aligned with the Bowel Hunter and the young magical beast controller. Facing this combined threat, Subaru's only ally was Rem, and with the village full of defenseless villagers, their situation was dire. However, Melly was more shocked by Elsa's words than anything else. Elsa, are you crazy? You want to betray Mother? You know what will happen to us if we do that. We'll both be killed. Is it because of the last mission's failure? It doesn't matter. If we kill everyone here and take out the silver-haired half-elf when she arrives, we can still complete the mission. Once we succeed, Mother will forgive your previous mistake." Hearing Elsa's decision to betray Mother, Melly's face was filled with fear. It was clear that Mother was a fearsome figure, someone who had left a lasting impression of terror on both Elsa and Melly. "At this point, I just don't want to be a meaningless assassin anymore. I want to live for a purpose. But as long as I remain in the organization, I'll never escape Mother's control. So, to free myself, I need a power strong enough to crush her." During her time with Wood, Elsa felt as though she had been redeemed. She enjoyed the balance of being able to hunt without feeling the guilt and nightmares that had plagued her before. But Melly thought Elsa's words were sheer nonsense. She believed Elsa must have been blackmailed or influenced by some sort of blessing. "So, this man beside you, he's your so-called new power? With his strength, you think he can defeat Mother and free us from her control?" Melly glanced at Wood with disdain. She had seen plenty of nobles like him. To her, Wood was nothing more than a pretty boy, even less threatening than Subaru. As Melly raised her hand, the shadows surrounding the village revealed themselves, massive magical beasts emerging from the forest and charging toward Wood. In a remote border town like this, any dangerous magical beasts would have long been taken care of by Roswell. The remaining ones, while threatening to ordinary people, weren't much of a challenge for anyone with a bit of strength. For someone like Wood, or even Elsa or Rem, these magical beasts were no more than fodder. Still, when magical beasts reached a certain number, their sheer presence could be intimidating. Rem stood ready with her morning star, guarding Subaru and the village children, while Elsa prepared to help Wood fend off the beasts. But Wood raised his hand, stopping her. "A power to control magical beasts? Not bad, she's got potential. But I'll handle this. After all, if I'm going to take someone under my wing, I need to show them that I'm strong enough to be their leader." The magical beasts Melly controlled were mostly animalistic in nature. One of the wolves, the fastest of the group, reached Wood first, its jaws wide open, ready to bite off his head. However, just as the wolf was about to strike, it locked eyes with Wood, and an overwhelming sense of fear washed over it, causing its fur to stand on end. Magical beasts weren't as intelligent as humans, but their instincts for danger far surpassed that of humans. Due to Melly's power, the beasts obeyed her commands, but their primal instincts still screamed at them to avoid Wood. As the massive wolf closed in, it already sensed the lethal danger emanating from Wood. "Your instincts as a living creature are good, but it's too late now." Wood didn't use any magic or swordsmanship. He simply threw a punch. Seemingly ordinary. Boom. A shockwave blasted from Wood's fist, carving a deep trench into the ground. The giant wolf was sent flying at supersonic speed, crashing into a tree and turning into an unrecognizable mass of flesh. Melly was dumbfounded. That wolf had been the strongest of the beasts she controlled, and despite the size difference between it and Wood, Wood had sent it flying with one punch. "Humphrey, so what if you're a top-tier fighter? I have more beasts. I'll wear you down with numbers." Though Melly was shocked by Wood's strength, she quickly regained her composure. No matter how strong he was, there were many more beasts in the forest. As long as she kept sending waves of beasts, Wood would eventually tire out. That was her strategy. Melly then climbed onto a flying beast, hovering high above the battlefield with her strongest beasts protecting her. Her plan was clear. Overwhelm Wood with sheer numbers, wearing him down bit by bit. However, this strategy had a major flaw. As a beast tamer, Melly herself was weak. Based on Wood's earlier punch, Melly assumed he was a skilled martial artist. As long as she kept her distance, no matter how strong he was, eventually, he would fall to the horde of beasts. Hovering in the air, Melly believed she had gained the upper hand. After all, martial artists couldn't attack from a distance or fly, so there was no way for Wood to reach her. "You're right. Individually, these beasts are easy to deal with, but their numbers are annoying. I could use powerful area of effect magic to kill them all like spraying insecticide. But this is a village, and magic doesn't distinguish between friend or foe. It's not suitable here. Which leaves me with only one option. Something that can wipe out the beasts without harming anyone else. But it might make everyone here a little sleepy." At first, Subaru and the others didn't understand what Wood meant. But the next moment, a powerful, invisible aura exploded from Wood, radiating outwards and enveloping the entire area. Subaru and the others immediately felt a wave of dizziness hit their heads. Thud, thud, thud. As the first beast collapsed, the others soon followed, dropping like wheat before a scythe, unconscious. Not only the beasts but even Subaru, the villagers, and the livestock fell unconscious, as if they had been struck down by an unseen force. The entire village, from the ordinary residents to the hundreds of magical beasts under Melly's control, had all collapsed, lifeless. The only ones still standing were Wood, Elsa, and Rem. Even Elsa and Rem, both seasoned fighters, had felt the intense dizziness when Wood unleashed that strange aura. When they finally regained their senses, they realized that only the three of them remained standing. "What the hell did you just do?" Melly crawled out from under her bird-like beast, staring at Wood in terror. "Interesting. Even though I didn't use my full strength, you managed to stay conscious under my conqueror's hockey. Your mental fortitude is impressive for someone so physically weak." Elsa and Rem had remained conscious due to their strength, but Melly, despite being physically weak, had resisted the effects of Wood's conqueror's hockey, which intrigued him. However, while Melly had withstood the mental assault, her bird-like beast had not. As it fell from the sky, Melly's frail body had been severely injured, leaving her with a broken leg from the fall. Chapter 346, Assassinating the Leader of the Assassination Organization, Mother Now. As Mealy Portrait looked at Wood slowly walking toward her eyes were filled with terror. Earlier, the confidence Mealy had shown when confronting Wood stemmed from the fact that she thought she had hundreds of magical beasts backing her. However, for some unknown reason, all those beasts had suddenly lost consciousness. When she saw Wood form an ice blade and walk along, finishing off the beasts that had fallen unconscious, Mealy was genuinely frightened. She simply didn't know your strength before, and her fear of Mother had been too deeply ingrained. There aren't many assassins with the power of blessings, especially at her young age. She's definitely worth cultivating. Elsa looked at Wood, who was approaching Mealy with the ice blade in hand, and pleaded with a face full of panic. She hadn't anticipated that things would develop this way. Originally, she had brought Wood to find Mealy in hopes that, before she committed any serious crimes, Wood's strength would help free Mealy from Mother and thus save her. But now, not only had they failed to save Mealy, but it seemed her life was about to be lost as well. As Wood drew closer, Mealy's young face finally showed a trace of fear. Even though her legs were broken from the fall, she used her arms to drag her body backward, desperately trying to put distance between herself and Wood. To Mealy, Wood now appeared no different from the most terrifying demon, and she could only attempt to widen the gap between them, hoping to feel some measure of safety. Unfortunately, with her legs broken, Mealy's crawling speed couldn't match Wood's walking pace. When Wood reached her, holding the ice blade stained with the blood of magical beasts, Mealy closed her eyes in terror. Elsa, watching Wood draw closer and closer to Mealy, quietly gripped the curved blade hidden in her cloak but ultimately released her hold on it. Elsa desperately wanted to save Mealy, just as she had saved the enslaved children before. But the power gap between her and Wood was simply too vast. Strictly speaking, it wasn't Wood's fault. It was Mealy's own overconfidence that had led to this outcome. As an assassin, she hadn't even grasped the most basic understanding of the disparity in strength between her and her enemies. Divine healing magic, Song of Healing. Wood, now standing in front of Mealy, reached out his blood-stained right hand toward her. Just as everyone thought he was about to use magic to kill the young beast user, a goddess's ethereal image slowly appeared behind him. The phantom goddess held a lyre, singing a sacred song, as waves of holy light descended upon them. Mealy, who had been bracing for pain with her eyes closed, was suddenly enveloped by a gentle, soothing energy. Instead of the pain she had expected, Mealy heard the sound of a beautiful lyre playing nearby. When Mealy curiously opened her eyes, she saw Wood bathed in the holy light of the goddess, looking like an angel who had descended right in front of her. That's right. Just moments ago, Wood had seemed like a ruthless demon. But now, with the special effects of the divine light enhancing his image, Mealy's perception of him had transformed into that of a radiant angel. Especially under the glow of the holy light, Mealy not only felt warmth but also noticed that her broken legs were miraculously healing at an astonishing rate. Well? Now do you believe I have the strength to defeat your mother? Wood reached his hand out to her. Despite her lingering fear of Wood, the combination of the divine effects and his striking appearance left Mealy too overwhelmed to resist, and she nervously extended her own hand. When Subaru Natsuki regained consciousness again, he found himself back at the Roswell mansion. Rem had carried him back, and as the witness to everything that had happened, she also reported the incident to the Margrave Roswell. And because Mealy Portrait had been taken away by Wood and Elsa, there was no magical beast attack on Arlem village this time, and Subaru was lucky enough not to die at the claws of the beasts. However, due to the lack of the magical beast incident, there was no progress in the romantic development between Subaru and Rem. Amelia, upon learning that both Mealy and Elsa had come because of her and that Arlem village had almost been attacked by magical beasts due to her, fell into a deep sense of guilt once again. After finding out that the situation had been resolved thanks to Wood, Amelia couldn't help but express her gratitude and praise for him. This naturally made Subaru, our real protagonist, feel a pang of jealousy. By rights, after accepting Amelia's invitation to come to the Roswell mansion, Subaru should have been able to increase his favorability with Amelia faster. But why was it that despite Wood not even interacting with Amelia directly, Her favorability for him seemed to be rising so rapidly. Barasu, if you're thinking of treating that man named Wood as a rival, I'd advise you to forget about it. From what Rem described, that kind of strong individual is far beyond your league. Barasu, you're not even worthy to carry his shoes, let alone compete for Lady Amelia's favor. Noticing Subaru's gaze lingering on Amelia, Ram, the pink-haired older twin, once again spoke in her usual sharp tone. Ram was once the strongest of the Ana tribe, even being hailed as the hornless Ana god. If not for the fact that she lost her horn, the source of her Ana powers. While saving Rem during the attack by the witches' cult on their village, Ram's strength at her peak would have even surpassed that of the Great Spirit Puck. However, even someone as powerful as Ram, upon learning that Wood had fought the Sword Saint Reinhard to a standstill and had knocked out nearly 100 magical beasts with just his aura, admitted that even her full-powered self wouldn't stand a chance against him. You'll see, I will prove to all of you that as long as I'm the protagonist, I'll shine no matter where I am. Even if I don't have overwhelming strength or stunning good looks, I still have a brilliant mind. When Amelia heads to the royal capital for the candidate ceremony, I'll show everyone that I'm more capable than Wood. The royal candidate ceremony of the Dragon Kingdom of Lanica was about to begin. Due to the sudden and mysterious death of the previous king, only the 5 dragon priestesses, recognized by the dragon itself, were eligible to bear the dragon-marked crest and participate in the royal election. Amelia was one of the 5 dragon priestesses, and Roswell was one of her supporters. Initially, Ram was supposed to stay behind at the Roswell mansion. But this time, Ram uncharacteristically requested that Roswell allow Ram to accompany them to the royal capital. When Ram asked Ram why afterward, she awkwardly revealed her reason. She wanted her sister Ram to go to the capital because Wood had mentioned he might show up there. As for why Ram wanted Ram to meet Wood, there was a reason for that too. The scene of Wood using healing magic to cure Amelia's broken legs had left a deep impression on Ram. While this world had magic, water-based healing magic didn't even come close to the level of Wood's healing magic. Ram's missing horn had always been a source of heartache for Ram, and she had worked hard to become stronger in an effort to help her sister in any way she could. Ram had once been the most talented of the Ana tribe, but because of her useless little sister, she had lost her immense power. Though Ram never voiced it, she had always felt deeply guilty about it. After witnessing Wood's near-miraculous healing powers, Ram had clung to him like a lifeline, begging for his help. However, the straight-laced Wood wasn't like Subaru. He had no interest in earning favor with girls. He told Rem that he had important business to attend to and didn't have time to visit Roswell's mansion to meet her sister. He wasn't joking. Wood had clearly sensed Rem's previous reluctance to let him go to Roswell's mansion. While Wood hadn't planned to visit the mansion before, that was then and this was now. It was one thing when they thought he was too dangerous to approach the mansion, but now that they needed his help, they wanted to invite him over? What did they take him for? Besides, what kind of person rushes to help when they're the one being asked for assistance? Of course, Wood didn't completely reject Rem's request. In the end, her sincere attitude won him over. Wood could tell that her sister meant a great deal to her. So he told Rem that he might be heading to the royal capital of Lanuka, and if they met again there, he would try to help her sister. However, Wood also gave Rem a fair warning, telling her that magic wasn't omnipotent, and he wasn't sure if he could help her sister. He could only promise to do his best. Meanwhile, after leaving Arlem village with Mealy and Elsa, Wood followed them to the headquarters of the underground assassination organization and finally met their so-called mother. This so-called mother was indeed a woman, but when Wood saw her, he could clearly sense that she wasn't truly human. Or at least, not a normal human. Elsa and Mealy were already considered powerful in this world, but when they encountered Mother, Wood could easily feel the fear radiating from them. Elsa, Mealy, have you completed your mission? And who is this man? Shouldn't you explain that to me? Elsa and Mealy's mother was currently standing behind a red curtain. Through the silhouette cast on the curtain, it was easy to tell that she had a curvaceous figure. Mother's exact age and appearance were a mystery, even to Elsa and Mealy, who had never seen her in person. Hearing the harsh reprimand from Mother, Elsa managed to maintain her composure, but Mealy clearly showed signs of trauma from past experiences. She shrank behind Wood and clung tightly to his clothing. Beneath the red curtain, a shadow slithered like a serpent, creeping quickly and silently along the floor toward Wood and the two women. Before long, what had been a two-dimensional shadow suddenly became three-dimensional, forming multiple shadowy arms that reached out to grab them. Watching the many shadow arms branching out like tree limbs, Wood swiftly condensed the moisture in the air, forming an ice blade. With dazzling flashes of light, the shadowy arms rushing toward them were swiftly cut down by Wood, as easily as slicing through grass. However, before Wood could even catch his breath, he realized that the severed shadow arms were melting back into the ground like black sludge, quickly reforming into new shadows to attack them again. This is Mother's ability. Attacking her shadows with swords or other physical weapons is useless because shadows have no physical form. No matter how many times you attack, the shadows will keep regrouping to attack again and again, relentlessly pursuing their enemies until they're dead. Elsa, wielding her curved blade, defended against the shadow attacks while protecting melee and retreating. As she did, she explained the situation to Wood. Elsa had tried more than once to break free from Mother's control, but her own blessing of controlling blades was completely countered by Mother's abilities. Moreover, none of them knew if this mysterious mother had only one power or more. Manipulating shadows, huh? It's a pretty fitting ability for an assassin. Since shadows can pass through obstacles and strike silently, it's impossible to predict the angle or strength of the attacks. But no matter how powerful an ability is, it always has a weakness. No power is without flaws. Wood parried the shadow arrows shooting out from the ground with his ice blade, while simultaneously gathering mana and forming a massive magic circle in front of him with his free hand. Divine Ice Magic, Winter's Breath. As the blue magic circle rapidly expanded in front of Wood, a blast of freezing air instantly filled the area. The moisture in the air froze in an instant, turning the small underground space into a massive ice chamber. Not only the floor and walls, but even the ceiling became a glistening surface of ice. The shadows that had been rushing toward Wood and the others were now frozen solid in place, as if time had stopped. Melee, who had been hiding behind Elsa, was completely stunned by the sight of the room turning into an icy wonderland in an instant. Now, she finally understood why Elsa always called Wood a monster. Chapter 347, Single-handedly subduing the underground assassination organization. This world has magic, and also the profession of magic users. Generally speaking, the strength of a magic user is directly tied to the magic they can wield and their magical energy. Ordinary humans, limited by their physical conditions, typically don't reach a high level of magical ability. Even with the addition of blessings, only a handful of magic users ever achieve significant success. Compared to ordinary humans, elemental spirits are the true darlings of the mana, magical energy, in the air. Powerful spirits can not only cast magic instantly, but their magic is also incredibly strong. Previously, Mealy had always believed that Wood was a formidable fighter. After all, he had been able to knock out a giant magical beast many times his size with a single punch. But now, witnessing Wood's ice magic, Mealy was utterly shocked to realize that Wood possessed great mastery in swordsmanship and was even a magic user. No, calling him just a magic user didn't seem accurate anymore. With such powerful magic and instant casting, not to mention the overwhelming magical energy, no one would doubt it if he were called a grand spirit who controlled the ice element. Is Mother defeated? Mealy asked with a mixture of apprehension and excitement as she looked at the icy landscape before her. Ever since she and Elsa joined the assassination organization, they had always lived under the control of Mother. Mealy was well aware of the consequences faced by those in the organization who failed their missions. Even someone as strong as Elsa had experienced mission failures. Mealy couldn't imagine what would happen to her if she also failed a mission. So, when she saw Wood display his formidable strength, freezing Mother and everything around her, Mealy couldn't help but feel a surge of emotion. Though Mother might be dead, Mealy still couldn't escape her identity as an assassin. It would simply mean going from being under one person's control to another's. Wood was equally terrifying, and perhaps even more powerful. However, compared to Mother, Mealy could sense that Wood had a basic set of principles and didn't just see them as tools. At least, from Mealy's perspective, the fact that Wood had healed her earlier was something Mother would never have done. Although they called her Mother, to Mother, they were more like disposable tools. There was also another crucial factor. Since Elsa had chosen to follow Wood, if Mealy wanted to stay with Elsa, she had no choice but to follow the same path to the end. She's not dead yet, but she's close. Controlling shadows is certainly troublesome, but in my domain, unless she has another trick up her sleeve, she won't have any more moves left. Wood said calmly, as he conjured another magic circle in his hand, gathering magical energy to form a massive orb of light. The orb of pure magical energy could not only be used for attack but also provided illumination. At this moment, the massive light orb in Wood's hand slowly rose to the center of the room, resembling a miniature sun, lighting up the entire basement brilliantly. The place where Elsa and Mother had previously been was more like a basement than a room. Smooth stone walls surrounded them, and in the dim light, the only sources of illumination were a few scattered lamps. This kind of environment was ideal for an assassin, where secrecy was the primary concern. The other reason for living in such a place was that it offered the most advantageous terrain for Mother's abilities. A closed-off space where anyone entering had no way to escape, and shadows could easily reach every corner. In this basement, Mother was practically invincible. However, just as Wood had said, no matter how powerful an ability was, it would always have a weakness. While shadows were stealthy and incredibly fast, Able to evade and ignore physical attacks like swords, they had one major flaw: light. As long as there was no shadow, her ability couldn't be fully utilized. Now, with the thick layer of ice covering the floor, walls, and even the ceiling, and the magical light reflecting off the ice, the entire underground space was dazzlingly bright. In such an environment, shadows couldn't form, rendering Mother's once impressive ability utterly useless. With her powerful ability neutralized, Mother tried to resist, even displaying impressive combat skills. However, her skills were far inferior to Wood's, and she was quickly defeated. Mother tried to beg for her life, even offering to become Wood's lackey. But before Wood could respond, a curved blade suddenly pierced her abdomen from behind, violently pulling out her intestines. "Don't believe a word this woman says," Elsa quickly explained, noticing Wood's displeased gaze. Elsa had wanted to kill Mother many times before but had never had the opportunity. Now that the chance had finally come, Elsa wasn't about to let it slip by, even if it meant risking Wood's wrath. "Since you killed her, you better be prepared to take her place as my lackey and work for me until you die." Unlike Mealy and Elsa, Wood had never intended to let Mother live. Though he didn't consider himself a good person, he still had a basic code of ethics. Anyone who rose to the top of the underworld was bound to be covered in sins. Mother was the head of an assassination organization and likely had loyal subordinates and connections in the underworld. Whether or not she was truly loyal to him didn't matter. Wood intended to completely reshuffle the organization and establish new rules, and that meant the old leader had to die. Wood wasn't upset because Elsa had killed Mother, he was simply annoyed that she had acted without his permission. He had planned to pretend to accept Mother's surrender to gain access to her wealth and resources. As the head of the assassination organization, Mother surely had hidden funds somewhere. But now, Elsa had taken it upon herself to stab her old boss, even dragging her intestines across the floor. With Mother now dead beyond recovery, there was no way to interrogate her, meaning Wood would have to spend more time searching for her hidden treasures. After Mother's death, the underworld experienced a wave of turmoil. Many people, upon hearing that the head of the assassination organization had died, sought to seize some territory for themselves. However, those who tried to grab land soon vanished without a trace, and it became clear to many that something much bigger was going on. While Mother's organization wasn't the only one in the underworld, it was certainly the most powerful. As the leaders of other assassination organizations gathered to discuss why Mother had suddenly died, the man responsible finally appeared. He introduced himself as Wood, a young man who brazenly walked into the meeting, accompanied by a sultry, black silk-clad woman and a lily holding a plush doll. Without hesitation, he sat in the leader's chair. Wood announced that he had killed Mother and taken control of her forces and territory. His purpose in attending the meeting was to inform the other leaders that he intended to take over their territories and organizations as well. Upon hearing Wood's arrogant proclamation, the gathered leaders, all heads of various assassination organizations, people who made a living on the edge of a knife, immediately reacted with outrage, flipping tables and shouting insults at Wood. The first to challenge him was a scar-faced, bare-chested brute, the leader of the second most powerful assassination organization after Mother's. With Mother's downfall, his group should have been poised to take the top spot. But now, a mere kid was claiming to have killed Mother and expected to absorb their organization? It was nothing but a pipe dream. But before the brute could draw his massive blade to teach Wood a lesson about who was boss, the temperature in the room plummeted. By the time everyone realized what was happening, they saw that the brute, the supposed leader of the second strongest organization in the underworld, had already been turned into an ice sculpture. His arrogant expression was still frozen on his face, but the thick layer of ice told the tale. He was no longer alive. Wood casually flicked the massive blade that had almost reached him. As the blade collided with his finger, the sound of metal clashing echoed, and the brute's ice sculpture shattered into countless icy fragments, scattering across the room. So this is the strength of the second most powerful assassination organization? No wonder your numbers are so few, and yet you've managed to stay second only to the top organization. As I said earlier, I'm taking over your organizations and territories. You can choose to be my lackeys, leave, or fight me. The rules will be set by me. So, who agrees? Who opposes? Wood's handsome, youthful face was calm as he gazed around the room, then glanced at the pile of ice shards that had once been the brute. The other leaders, stunned by what they had witnessed, remained silent. They wanted to voice their objections, but the memory of the brute's swift demise kept them quiet. Both the Bowel Hunter and the Beast Master had been assassins under Mother's command, and everyone in the room was familiar with their abilities and blessings. The power that had frozen the brute in an instant couldn't possibly belong to either of them. It had to be this young man. Although he might not be as terrifying as Mother. The brute had been a prominent figure in the underworld, and now he had been killed in seconds. That could only mean the young man before them wasn't as simple as he appeared. So, What does your silence mean? Agree or disagree? I'll give you 1 more minute. If you remain silent, be prepared to never speak again. Wood's cold words made the room feel as though the temperature had dropped several more degrees, and everyone present began to shiver. This chill wasn't just a psychological effect. It was real. As time passed, a thin layer of frost began to spread across the conference table, and the killers in the room felt the ice seeping into their bones. The underworld has always been ruled by strength. Whoever has the biggest fist is the boss. Since you've killed Mother and easily dispatched Scarface, you've clearly proven your strength, so I have no objections to you leading us. As the frost crept up their legs, one of the killers finally understood that Wood was the real deal. If they didn't speak up, they might end up like Scarface, shattered into a pile of ice shards. That's right, I also support Wood as our leader. Our Black Crow organization will follow Lord Wood's lead. If anyone dares to oppose, they'll have to answer to us. After the first person stood up, others soon followed, one after another, and within just 2 days, Wood had completely taken control of the entire underworld's assassination organizations. As I thought, reasoning with these underworld scum is pointless. Using brute force to convince them is the quickest and most effective way. Elsa had previously explained the other assassination organizations and their influence to Wood, even proposing a plan to slowly weaken their power. But Wood found that approach too time-consuming and opted to use his own method instead. Now that you've forced these assassination leaders to submit through strength, they won't be loyal. Aren't you worried that they might betray you in the future? Looking at Wood's back, Elsa voiced her concerns. While his method was simple and direct, it could lead to significant problems later. Don't be naive. Even if I followed your method and slowly won them over, do you think they'd truly be loyal to me? This is the underworld. These people are killers. There's no such thing as loyalty. In their eyes, there's only risk and reward. As long as I provide them with enough benefits, they'll be loyal. But if I can't offer them anything, do you really think they'd stick around and risk their lives for me? Wood had spent over a decade as a major player in the underworld of the pirate world, and he understood these types of people far better than anyone else. Perhaps Elsa's concerns might come true, but Wood didn't care. Under his absolute power, they could either submit or leave. Chapter 348, Walking Around with a Lily, Flirting? The Dragon Kingdom, Lunaka's capital. As the royal selection ceremony was about to begin, the already bustling capital became even livelier. At this moment, Wood was strolling down the busiest street in the capital, dressed in a black cloak with a knight's sword strapped to his waist. A handsome young man with golden hair and a striking presence like his could easily attract attention, even if he wasn't familiar with the capital. Plenty of young women would gladly volunteer to be his guide if he just asked. But there was a catch. Wood wasn't alone. Behind him trailed a little girl with sky-blue hair tied into 3 braids, holding a stuffed doll in one hand and licking an ice cream cone with the other, her face radiating innocent joy. And this blue-haired lily behind him was none other than the beast tamer Mealy. Wood originally planned to move through the capital on his own, but Elsa had pointed out that since they had just taken control of the underground assassination organization and set new rules, many things would be difficult to manage without Wood's immediate presence. To keep in touch with him, they needed a reliable means of communication. In a world like this, with no phones or long-distance communication magic, the only way to exchange information was through letters. So, Mealy had been sent to accompany Wood to ensure he could be reached at any time. Though she might not be much help in combat, as a beast tamer, Mealy could use magical beasts to deliver messages. And this was the capital of the Dragon Kingdom, not some small frontier town like Roswell's territory. It was heavily guarded. Assassins, including people like the Bowel Hunter Elsa, were wanted criminals in several nations and couldn't openly wander around the capital with Wood. The only person who fit the bill, able to relay messages and move around without drawing too much attention, was the relatively new assassin, Mealy. Mealy, we talked about this, right? I'm buying you treats, but if I start a conversation with someone, you know what to call me, right? Wood asked, looking at the blue-haired lily beside him, licking her ice cream with a look of innocent bliss. He couldn't help but feel exhausted. Wood hadn't prepared well for his trip to the capital and didn't even know where to find the royal knights. He had managed to charm a young lady using his good looks and air of mystery, nearly securing an invitation to dinner, hoping to use the opportunity to gather information about the Dragon Kingdom. But just as the young woman was falling for Wood's charm and giggling at his flattery, Mealy's words had changed everything, making the woman's expression turn cold before she slapped Wood and stormed off. Remembering what Mealy had said, Wood felt another twitch of frustration. In hindsight, he couldn't blame the woman for slapping him. Because Mealy had innocently called out, "Darling, are we going to play with this big sister after dinner?" For heaven's sake, no matter how otherworldly this place was, having a girl of Mealy's age call him darling was bound to be seen as criminal. And with Mealy's innocent demeanor, the young woman had no reason to doubt her. Naturally, she had assumed Wood was some kind of perverted noble with a twisted taste. Considering the slap the young woman gave him, it was actually a mercy that she hadn't reported him to the Royal Knights. After that fiasco, Wood chalked it up to Mealy's lack of understanding due to her upbringing. After all, she had spent most of her life surrounded by magical beasts and assassins. Still, he patiently explained to her that terms like darling were reserved for lovers or spouses. Even if assassins needed to disguise themselves, their age difference would make such terms inappropriate for their cover. Mealy nodded in understanding, and after Wood bribed her with more ice cream, she promised to cooperate. I've found another potential guy, and she looks even more sophisticated than the last one, Wood muttered to himself. And from her appearance, she's probably a noble, which means she'll know more about the kingdom. This time, the target of Wood's attention was a blonde girl holding a red folding fan, her head adorned with an ornate black headdress, and dressed in an elegant black and red Gothic gown. Not only did she have striking features, but the dress did nothing to hide her impressive figure. As Wood approached, preparing his charm, Mealy, trailing behind with her usual innocent demeanor, discreetly rolled her eyes. Despite her limited exposure to the world, Mealy wasn't stupid. Having grown up with magical beasts and lived with Elsa, she had a basic understanding of things. Wood claimed he was gathering information, but why did he only approach beautiful women? Couldn't men offer valuable information too? Since the death of Mother, Mealy had felt a rare sense of freedom. At first, Wood had terrified her, but as she got to know him, she realized that despite his strength, he was kind. Unlike Mother, whose power filled her with fear, Wood's power made her feel safe. Walking through the streets with Wood, eating the treats he bought her, Mealy felt something she had never experienced before. A sense of family. And so, when Wood approached other women, Mealy felt annoyed and a bit possessive. This was why she had deliberately sabotaged each of Wood's flirtations, ensuring none of his targets stayed interested for long. Now, seeing that Wood had chosen another beautiful woman as his next target, one with an even more impressive figure, Mealy's mood darkened. Young lady, we're new to the capital, and your beauty, like the morning sun, shines so brightly that I couldn't help but notice you from across the crowd. Wood began. Might I have the honor of treating you to a cup of coffee, and perhaps you could share with us some knowledge about this wonderful city? Wood cringed internally at his own lines. They were incredibly cliché, but this kind of approach worked with medieval nobles. With his charisma, good looks, and the noble etiquette he had picked up in this world, his approach had never failed with noble girls from other worlds. Though it's a rather common way to strike up a conversation, I suppose I don't mind sharing my knowledge with the ignorant. The blonde responded, closing her fan with a snap. But your words were incorrect. I'm not like the morning sun. I am the sun. The entire world revolves around me. Wood's first thought was that despite her beauty, this woman clearly had a few screws loose. But then he realized something. Her speech, while arrogant, was perfectly in line with the elegant bearing of a noble. It wasn't that her brain was damaged. This was just her personality, proud and self-assured to the point of delusion. Since you're offering, I'll choose the place. I trust you don't mind? She said, pointing to an expensive-looking establishment nearby. Before they had even walked a few steps, a group of thugs appeared out of nowhere, drawn to the noblewoman's striking appearance and figure, and began harassing her. As the only man accompanying her, Wood naturally became their target as well. But a few low-level thugs were no match for Wood. With a few swift punches and kicks, he sent them running with bruised faces. Judging by your skills, you're not exactly the simple tourist you claim to be. The blonde noble remarked, her expression showing mild surprise. And you, young lady, don't seem like an ordinary noble. You didn't seem the least bit flustered during that encounter. Wood replied. To be honest, Wood was starting to regret his decision to approach this noble woman. There was something off about her. She always seemed completely calm and in control. And in a heavily guarded city like this, how could common thugs dare to harass a noble in broad daylight? Something about the whole situation felt off. Why should I panic? As I told you, the entire world revolves around me. Whatever happens, the outcome will always work in my favor. The blonde said. Wood mentally filed her under trouble and was about to excuse himself when Mealy, without realizing it, provided the perfect assist. Father, will those bad men come back to get us? She asked innocently, licking her ice cream. Mealy had taken Wood's previous advice to heart. Knowing that their age gap made posing as lovers inappropriate, she had adjusted her role. Now, the little blue-haired girl was staring up at Wood with wide, innocent eyes. Wood's face twitched in response. If it were up to him, he would have preferred to be called Big Brother rather than Father. Still, since he wanted to ditch the troublesome noblewoman, Mealy's mistake was a golden opportunity. Worst case, he'd get slapped again. But what happened next surprised both Wood and Mealy. Instead of slapping Wood, the blonde noblewoman smiled and turned to Mealy. "Oh, so this is your daughter? How lovely. I've always wanted a child, but unfortunately, none of the men I've married have been up to the task." Wood was stunned. The woman looked no older than 18 or 19, yet she had been married before? No, he reminded himself, this was a different world. It wasn't unusual for someone her age to already be married. "I didn't realize. Madam, lady, I apologize for my presumption. It seems I've intruded. Please, allow me to take my leave." Wood was ready to make a hasty exit, pulling Mealy along, but the noblewoman stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Did I say you could leave? Are you scared now that you've heard I've been married before? You're wandering around flirting with women while dragging your daughter along, and you're afraid of me?" she teased, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Wood had been right. This was no ordinary noble. She was Priscilla Barry-Eel, one of the 5 dragon priestesses of the 42nd Royal Selection. And aside from being a dragon priestess, Priscilla was also known as the Bloody Bride. This wasn't a compliment but more of a curse, for Priscilla's husband, Raps Barry-Eel, had mysteriously died the day after their wedding. Poor Raps hadn't even had the chance to touch her before he dropped dead, and Priscilla had inherited the entire Barry-Eel estate. And her frequent claim that the whole world revolves around me wasn't just narcissism. Priscilla possessed a blessing known as the Blessing of the Sunday, which caused events around her to constantly shift in her favor during the daytime. Simply put, whatever happened in her presence during the day would naturally turn out in her favor. This was why she often said the world revolved around her. On top of that, Priscilla had exceptional talent in sun magic and swordsmanship, thanks to her blessing. Even if Wood hadn't stepped in to deal with the thugs, Priscilla could have handled them herself. The reason she hadn't acted was simple. She trusted her blessing to ensure everything would resolve in her favor. Chapter 349, Mistaken for a Scoundrel by the Knights. Priscilla, unfazed by the nickname Bloody Bride, made no effort to avoid the title. In fact, her unfortunate husband's sudden demise might very well have been caused by her blessing of the Sunday because Priscilla desired it. Events always adjusted themselves in her favor. Thus, her husband, whom she'd never even met, conveniently kicked the bucket. As a result, Priscilla gained control of the Barry-Eel family and became one of the 5 dragon priestesses. If she won the royal selection, she would become the new queen of the Dragon Kingdom, and she could finally enact her long-awaited revenge. "Apologies, though I have a daughter this age, I'm not interested in widows," Wood said, pulling Mealy along. "You're welcome to try stopping me, but while I can tell you have considerable magic power, I don't think it would be easy for you." Wood delivered his unapologetic response as he bypassed Priscilla. She simply smiled and did not try to stop him again, showing no signs of displeasure. After leaving Priscilla behind and heading to another street, Wood made sure to drill it into Mealy's head that she should now call him Big Brother. And after much grumbling, Mealy finally agreed. Just as Wood was about to strike up a conversation with another young lady, a group of knights in armor blocked his path. The one leading them was a large, stern-looking middle-aged man with short pale green hair, wearing the armor of a knight. He introduced himself as Marco Skildark, captain of the Royal Guard of Lanuka, the Dragon Kingdom. The reason they approached Wood? They needed him for questioning. At first, Wood and Mealy assumed that their identities as part of the underground assassination group had been exposed. However, when Captain Marcos began speaking, it became clear that the reason they had been tracked down had more to do with Priscilla. Apparently, after Wood left, Priscilla had reported to the Royal Guard that she had been harassed by thugs in the capital. Naturally, the Royal Guard took the incident very seriously. After all, the capital of the Dragon Kingdom was supposed to be a secure and orderly place. An event like this occurring in their jurisdiction was a stain on the honor of the knights. But the real reason they had mobilized so quickly, and why Marcos himself had come, was due to Priscilla's special status. Not only was she now the head of the Barry-Eel family, but she was also one of the 5 candidates eligible to become the next queen. If Priscilla were to become queen, the idea of her being harassed by thugs in her own kingdom would be nothing short of outrageous. To preserve their dignity, the Royal Guard had swiftly scoured the streets, rounding up every thug they could find in order to prevent any further incidents during the royal selection ceremony. Though Wood didn't look anything like a thug, and Priscilla hadn't actually accused him of anything, he was still being brought in by the knights. Their reasoning was simple. During their investigation, the knights had discovered that Wood had approached multiple young women in a single day, and they deemed his behavior suspicious. They wanted to question him about his motives. They also suspected that Mealy might have been kidnapped by Wood, and thus insisted that he come with them to explain his actions. Officially, the knights made it sound perfectly reasonable, but in reality, they had mistaken Wood for a scoundrel and wanted to ensure he wasn't causing trouble during the royal selection. So, Wood was taken in by the Royal Guard for questioning, while Mealy, due to her status as a child, received special treatment. At first, Wood considered resisting, but then he remembered he had been looking for the Royal Guard's headquarters anyway. The process might have been different than he expected, but if it got him there, the result was the same. However, upon entering the Royal Guard's interrogation room, Wood was once again caught off guard. Priscilla was already there, ready to identify the criminals. Since the Royal Guard had rounded up so many thugs, Marcos was unable to confirm which ones had harassed Priscilla, so they had brought her in to identify them personally. As Marcos escorted Wood into the room, Priscilla spotted him from afar and smiled. "Didn't I tell you? We would meet again. When I desire something, events always turn in my favor." She unfurled her red fan, concealing her lower face, and addressed Marcos. "Captain, would it be possible for me to take this man with me?" Marcos glanced at Priscilla, then at Wood, quickly realizing there was a connection between the two. Wood, however, felt the urge to refuse. Priscilla was dangerous. Her blessing of the sun was absurdly overpowered. This was the second time Wood had encountered such a broken blessing. He used to think his own two blessings were strong, but compared to this, they were nothing special. Priscilla's blessing of the sun wasn't quite as overwhelming as Lanehart's world's favor. But it was still ridiculous. Not only did it boost her combat strength, but it also gave her a daytime luck aura that adjusted everything in her favor. In cultivation novels, she'd basically be the chosen one with heaven's fortune. Before Wood could voice his rejection, Priscilla spoke again, her tone laced with amusement. "You should think carefully, dear sir. I'm currently identifying the thugs who harassed me. Should I feel startled or frightened, I might end up pointing the finger at the wrong person." Even an idiot could hear the threat in her words, and Captain Marcos wasn't pleased either. However, there was nothing he could say. After all, the Royal Guard had failed to prevent this incident in the first place, and as the victim, Priscilla had every right to decide who the culprits were. Wood's plan to join the Royal Guard, which would activate his other blessing, would be derailed if he were branded a criminal. So, for now, he had no choice but to go along with it. Once they left the interrogation room, Wood's patience ran out. He grabbed Priscilla by the throat, his voice cold. "What do you want? I don't care if you're a dragon priestess. That title means nothing to me. If you push me, I'll kill you." Though Priscilla finally showed a hint of discomfort, just as Wood was about to let go, his observation hockey suddenly warned him. Wood dodged to the side just in time to avoid a strike, as a sword slashed through the space where he had just been standing. Standing before him now was a towering, muscular man wearing a green vest and a knight's helmet, missing an arm. "Hey there, handsome," the man said casually. "Mind staying away from this lady? I'm doing you a favor, trust me. Anyone who gets close to her ends up with a bad fate. If I weren't stuck as her knight, I'd have run off long ago." Though the man had attacked, Wood didn't sense much hostility from him. Still, a sneak attack was a sneak attack, and Wood wasn't about to let it slide. He leapt forward, delivering a punch in retaliation. A simple straight punch, yet it caused a sonic boom in the air. The knight's pupil shrank as he hastily raised his sword to block. Clang! The impact of Wood's punch against the sword rang out like the clash of metal, and to the knight's shock, Wood's slim frame managed to bend the sword with his fist. The immense pressure traveled down the man's arm, and the next second, his body was sent flying like a cannonball, crashing into the wall and leaving a huge dent. "I appreciate the warning," Wood said calmly. "But the real problem here is that your master won't leave me alone. I don't usually hit women, but consider this a warning. If you keep coming after me, I won't be so polite the next time." Priscilla, watching her knight get sent flying, was left speechless, her mouth slightly agape in surprise. She had known that Wood was strong, but she hadn't expected him to be this strong. She knew the capabilities of her knight, Aldebaran. He was once a sword slave in the gladiatorial arenas of the Volotcha Empire. Before she rescued him, Aldebaran had defeated countless opponents in the arena. Despite having lost an arm, Aldebaran was still one of the most formidable warriors in the Volotcha Empire, a far cry from the street thugs they'd encountered earlier. Yet, even with his guard up, Aldebaran had been sent flying by a single punch from Wood. This only reinforced Priscilla's belief that her instincts about Wood had been right, and she called out to him once more. "Do you have more business with me?" Wood asked, his voice icy. "Your knight was holding back, I'll give him that, but I wasn't even using my full strength. If you want to fight me together, I wouldn't bet on your chances." Wood was quickly realizing that while the overall power level of this world wasn't particularly high, there was a surprising density of strong individuals. Priscilla and her knight, Aldebaran, were no ordinary people. The magic power Wood sensed from Priscilla, coupled with Aldebaran's skills, indicated they weren't weak. Compared to Lanehart, maybe there was no comparison, but Wood doubted even Mother could have defeated Priscilla in a straight fight. "I have no intention of making you an enemy," Priscilla replied. I only stopped you earlier because you piqued my interest. My blessing directs events to benefit me, and a voice told me to get to know you. So, I followed that instinct. She smiled. And as always, my blessing was right. You are no ordinary man. So, now I ask. Are you interested in working for me? Wood's expression softened slightly, but he still shook his head. Sorry, but I'm not interested in serving anyone right now. I also have no interest in the royal selection. Besides, you already have a capable knight by your side. You don't need me. Becoming a personal knight might have activated his knight's honor blessing, but Wood found Priscilla's personality difficult. She might have the looks and the figure, but high and mighty princesses weren't his type. Becoming a knight of the royal guard won't be easy for a commoner like you, Priscilla said, her voice teasing. However, if you buy me the cup of tea you promised, I could put in a good word for you. Wood stopped in his tracks at her words. You mean, I don't have to become your knight or servant? Just a cup of tea? He asked. Priscilla nodded, her smile widening. Of course. No one ever refuses my invitations. Besides, some people seem to enjoy running away after they've already succeeded in their flirting attempts. Priscilla was sharp. The moment she laid eyes on Wood and Mealy, she knew they couldn't possibly be father and daughter. Mealy had only called Wood father because she was worried Priscilla might steal him away. But Priscilla saw through that in an instant. With Mealy taken away by the knights, this was her perfect chance to get to know the mysterious man standing before her. Chapter 350, The Royal Guard's Entrance Test. You didn't mention your cup of tea would cost 3 gold dragon coins, and I believe I only offered you tea, not an entire meal. Wood said, a pained expression on his face as he looked at Priscilla, who was sipping her tea gracefully. Sitting in front of her was an extravagantly delicate-looking cake that seemed far too lavish. Wood had become familiar with the local economy back in the small town where he met Amelia. Frankly speaking, the common currency used by civilians and merchants was typically copper dragon coins, with silver dragon coins only used on rare occasions. Gold dragon coins, the highest denomination, were so valuable that even poorer nobles might only have a few dozen in their coffers. But here they were, with Priscilla having just brought Wood to an incredibly luxurious establishment, where a single cup of tea had cost him 3 gold dragon coins. And that cake, which wasn't even large enough for Wood to take a proper bite out of, had set him back another 2 gold dragon coins. In total, this afternoon tea with Priscilla had cost him 5 gold dragon coins. To put this into perspective, 5 gold dragon coins equaled 50,000 copper dragon coins. Enough for an ordinary family to live in a small town for 10 years. What's so strange about it? This is the capital of the Dragon Kingdom, where the nation's nobles reside. Priscilla said casually. This establishment is the finest pastry shop in the capital. The price is entirely reasonable. Or, could it be that the gentleman charming the ladies has become so poor that he can't even afford to treat someone to a meal? She teased. If you'd like, I could cover the bill for you. But then you'd owe me a debt. Wood cut her off with a wave of his hand, his expression firm. No need. I'm not some wealthy noble, but I can afford 5 gold coins. Wood silently thanked the treasure he had looted from Mother after taking her down. At least her little stash had yielded dozens of gold coins. He was also relieved that Priscilla had only invited him for tea and not dinner. At her level of spending, a full meal might have left him washing dishes to pay off the debt. Priscilla raised an eyebrow, somewhat surprised that Wood could actually afford to pay such a sum. Although she lived lavishly, she didn't usually spend to such extremes. She had chosen this place specifically to challenge Wood, hoping to make him work off the debt in her service. To her surprise, Wood had more wealth than she expected. Thank you for dining with us. Your total is 5 gold dragon coins and 3 silver dragon coins. The smiling waitress said, handing over the bill. Wood's face went blank as he pointed to the line for water on the bill. This place is a ripoff. Charging for plain water is bad enough, but 3 silver dragon coins for it. The waitress remained composed, her professional smile unwavering. Sir, our water is no ordinary water. It comes from the snow of the highest mountain peaks. Due to transportation costs and labor, the price is quite reasonable. For a moment, Wood seriously considered flipping the table, but in the end, he paid the bill without causing a scene. Under the waitress's sweet smile, he cursed the decadence of the noble lifestyle in his mind. There's no need to push yourself so hard, Priscilla said with a chuckle. If you were to work for me, I could pay you 20 gold dragon coins a month. The Royal Guard, while prestigious, only offers 5 gold dragon coins a month in comparison. Leaning slightly forward, Priscilla straightened her posture to better display her impressive curves, adding with a coy smile. Besides, I am the head of the Berry Eel family, one of the 5 royal candidates, and still single. Hold it, hold it. Wood quickly interrupted. You're the infamous Bloody Bride. I'm not looking to die young, thanks. We've had our tea, and I've upheld my end of the deal. Now, Lady Berry Eel, are you going to fulfill your promise? Though Priscilla typically shrugged off the title Bloody Bride without hesitation, for some reason, hearing Wood use it left her visibly displeased. Her fixation on Wood stemmed from more than just a passing interest. She trusted her instincts, or more precisely, her blessing, which always seemed to guide her toward good fortune. Priscilla's real name was Priscilla Benedicta, once one of the many princes and princesses of the Holy Volatian Empire. When she was a teenager, she had participated in the Empire's selection of the Emperor ceremony but was outmaneuvered by her half-brother, the current Emperor Vincent, and lost. Priscilla only escaped assassination afterward by faking her death and relying on her knight, Al. When she first met Al in the gladiatorial arena, Priscilla had a strong feeling about him, which is why she saved him. Her instincts proved correct, as it was thanks to Al's protection that she had been able to fake her death and escape the Holy Volatian Empire. Now, that same instinct was telling her that Wood was even more significant than Al had been. With the 42nd Dragon Kingdom's royal selection about to begin, Priscilla felt that Wood's presence could very well affect the outcome of the ceremony. Unfortunately, unlike when she recruited Al, winning Wood over wasn't going as smoothly as she had hoped. The earlier incidents had clearly soured Wood's opinion of her, and if she pressed him further, she feared he might walk away for good. After some hesitation, Priscilla finally decided to honor their agreement. She took Wood to the Royal Guard's headquarters and, using her noble status, personally recommended him to Captain Marcus. As the head of the Berry Eel family and one of the royal candidates, Priscilla had the right to recommend a knight. However, Marcus, as the captain, didn't want the Royal Guard, the kingdom's most elite force, turning into a dumping ground for noble connections. Wood, who had been brought in earlier under suspicion of being a scoundrel, hadn't left the best impression on Marcus, either. But given Priscilla's status, Marcus couldn't outright refuse, so he said, "The Royal Guard is the kingdom's strongest military force, composed of its most exceptional knights. Lady Berry Eel's recommendation is valid, but we have our own rules. Anyone wishing to join the Royal Guard must first pass our entrance test." Priscilla frowned, clearly displeased. The captain's response was essentially questioning her judgment. However, Wood had no objections and calmly agreed to undergo the test. After all, this was the Royal Guard, the kingdom's elite. It would be strange if they allowed anyone in without some sort of examination. Wood was also curious to gauge the Royal Guard's strength. If he recalled correctly, Leonhardt had mentioned that he, too, was a member of the Royal Guard. Surely, not all the knights in this force were as overpowered as him? Setting Leonhardt aside, Wood had encountered Captain Marcus twice now. While Marcus was clearly skilled, Wood could tell that he wasn't on Leonhardt's level by any stretch. The test is simple: you'll engage in a knight's duel with one of our Royal Guard knights. If you can hold your own without losing, you'll qualify to join. The knight's duel was a special magical scenario used by the Royal Guard for training. It was somewhat similar to PvP in RPG games, a one-on-one duel in a controlled environment. In this space, fighters would still feel pain if they were injured, but even if they were to die in the duel, they wouldn't die for real. Instead, they'd be ejected from the scenario, with only mental fatigue to show for it. This facility was commonly used for the Royal Guard's intense training sessions. "Julius," Marcus called out, scanning the group of knights before him. "You'll be the one to test him. I trust you'll be fair." The man named Julius, a handsome knight with elegant manners and violet hair, stepped forward, causing a stir among the watching knights. "Is this for real? The captain actually chose Julius to test the newcomer? That's like sealing the gates to the Royal Guard." One knight whispered. "With the kingdom's finest as his opponent, this guy doesn't stand a chance." Another muttered. When Priscilla saw that Marcus had chosen Julius to face Wood, she was visibly angry. "Captain Marcus, are you telling me that the Royal Guard's entrance standards are now so high that an applicant has to face the kingdom's finest and not lose? As far as I know, Julius is your vice-captain. How many knights in your entire guard can even beat him? I doubt even you could, Captain." Priscilla was genuinely furious, feeling that Marcus was deliberately undermining her by throwing such an impossibly difficult test at Wood. The kingdom's finest, Julius, was renowned, even back in the Holy Volatian Empire. Pitting a newcomer against him was absurd. If all the knights had to pass such a rigorous test, the Royal Guard wouldn't have nearly as many members, and even the captain might not qualify. "Of course," Marcus said, knowing that choosing Julius was a bit much. "When Julius is the opponent, the rules are adjusted accordingly. If your friend here can last 5 minutes without being knocked out, we'll consider it a pass." Before Priscilla could protest further, Wood spoke up. "No need to lower the bar. Let's stick with the original rules." He glanced at Marcus, a glint of curiosity in his eyes. "But I do have one question. What happens if I beat the kingdom's finest? Is there a special reward?" The entire hall fell silent for a moment, then erupted into laughter. The knights, especially those who had fought alongside Julius for years, couldn't contain their amusement. They thought Wood must be a country bumpkin, someone who might have been a big deal in some backwater place, but was completely out of his league here. "I'll tell you this," Marcus said, not laughing but clearly skeptical. "If you manage to defeat... No, even if you manage to avoid defeat against Julius, I'll make you a captain of one of our squads." Marcus knew Julius's skill level all too well. Like most of those present, he figured Wood was just another overconfident fool from some remote corner of the world who had no idea who he was dealing with. As Wood and Julius stepped into the magical dueling arena, the knight's duel officially began. A shimmering barrier formed around them, separating them from the spectators. Marcus, Priscilla, and the rest of the knights moved to the viewing area to watch. "My name is Julius Julius," the violet-haired knight said, his voice calm and polite. "Please, do not hold back. Unlike the others, I've never underestimated you. From the moment you stepped into this arena, the spirits around me have been warning me of your presence." Julius's expression grew serious. "They're telling me you're a dangerous man. And that means you're not just skilled with a sword. You must also possess considerable magical power, correct?" Julius Julius, with his noble birth, flawless manners, and unparalleled skill, was the embodiment of a knight. He excelled in swordsmanship, magic, and strategy, earning the trust of his fellow knights. It was no wonder they called him the kingdom's finest, for in every way, he was the very definition of a true knight. Chapter 351, The Overpowered Sword Saint, Wood's Unmatched Strength. "My name is Wood, just an unremarkable commoner from some distant place." He introduced himself calmly, sizing up the man before him. "I can't claim to offer guidance, not to someone carrying titles like the Sword of the Kingdom and the Finest Knight." From the moment Julius Julius appeared, Wood knew this wasn't just a pretty face. Since coming to this world, he hadn't met too many people, but those who could give him a genuine sense of danger were rare. Reinhard van Astrie certainly, and perhaps a blend of Puck and Amelia. Now, Julius managed to exude that same aura, enough to be placed in the same category. In fact, the feeling Julius gave him was even more formidable than people like Elsa and Priscilla. Julius drew his sword with elegant precision, giving Wood a courteous knightly salute before suddenly vanishing from sight. To say he disappeared would be misleading. His movement was simply so swift that ordinary eyes could no longer track him. No way. Is Julius going all out? If so, wouldn't his opponent be taken down in an instant? Julius was undeniably one of the strongest members of the Royal Guard. Besides the sword Saint Reinhard, almost no one could hold a candle to him. Even Reinhard, without his blessings, might not have a significant edge in sheer swordsmanship over Julius. Julius's impressive strength and his sudden seriousness startled the watching knights, who were used to his reserved power. As everyone watched with bated breath, the scene before them shocked every onlooker. The young man they had dismissed as a mere country bumpkin responded immediately to Julius's sudden attack. Clang! A fierce gust of wind radiated outwards as their swords clashed, sparks flying from the impact. The watching knights could hardly believe their eyes. The boy they had pegged as a nobody had moved with speed that matched Julius's, meeting his attack head-on. "Impressive speed," Julius commented, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "But it appears I have the upper hand in strength." The two swords clashed only briefly before Julius felt an overwhelming force surge through his arm, forcing him back in surprise. With a look of shock, Julius was launched backwards, temporarily airborne and unable to adjust himself. Realizing his vulnerable position, Julius quickly reacted, clutching his sword in one hand and extending the other to conjure multiple fireballs. In this world, magic users drew on their internal mana, or odd, channeling it through gates to cast spells. The potency of their magic depended on the size and number of their gates. Thanks to his blessing of spirit affinity, Julius had access to all 6 elemental magics and could create larger gates with the support of spirits. As the near 10 fireballs, initially the size of ping-pong balls, were launched from Julius's hand, they expanded midair to the size of soccer balls, each trailing heat as they sped toward Wood. Yet, as these giant fireballs descended upon him, Wood didn't so much as flinch. Instead, his face lit up with a fierce fighting spirit. "A swordsman who wields magic, huh? I'll admit, it's been a while since I've met someone similar," he said with a grin. "Water's Saint magic, curtain of cascading water." Wood raised a hand, opening his own gate and unleashing a surge of mana. The ground rumbled as a rush of water erupted from below, forming a protective barrier before him. Julius's fireballs collided with the water curtain, creating an intense clash of elements that filled the arena with dense steam. That country bumpkin. No, that new recruit. He's a swordsman and a magic user, just like Julius. He's a prodigious knight. One of the knights murmured in awe. Despite the brief skirmish, Everyone watching no longer dared to underestimate Wood. To withstand Julius's first strike and conjure such powerful water magic showed that Wood's abilities were exceptional, even among the royal guard. Well, a knight's duel, huh? That's rare. Came a new voice. And even rarer that Captain Marcus would authorize it. A knight's duel consumes quite a few resources, and he's always stingy about that. Added another voice. Arriving just in time, two figures approached the arena. One of them, to Wood's surprise, was none other than Reinhard van Astrie. His companion, though somewhat feminine in appearance and attire, was actually Felix Argyle. A flat-chested cat-eared demi-human. Despite his androgynous appearance, Felix was a well-known healing specialist, holding the prestigious title of Blue. And the youngest to earn it. Not a front-line combatant, Felix's strength still placed him among the top 5 in the Royal Guard, and he was good friends with both Reinhard and Julius. The pair had arrived late because of a minor incident with Felt, whom Reinhard had recently brought to the capital. She had wanted to return to the slums, and in her reckless attempt, ended up injuring herself, prompting Reinhard to ask Felix to heal her. Neither expected to return to such a lively scene in the Royal Guard. "Captain, what's the occasion today? Who's dueling in the knight's duel?" The residual mana in the air suggests it's a fierce one. Reinhard asked, looking curiously at Marcus. Seeing both Reinhard and Felix among the onlookers, Marcus kept his gaze on the misty arena and replied. "Julius is testing a new recruit." Felix's eyes widened in shock. "Julius? And a new recruit is actually holding his own against him? Just who is this guy? Some knight trained by one of the capital's noble families?" Knowing Julius's capabilities, Felix was stunned. The intensity of the magical remnants suggested this new recruit was exceptional. "No, he's not from any noble family. He was actually recommended by Priscilla, one of the kingdom's royal candidates." Marcus explained. "His previous profession? Well, he was a rogue. But given what we're seeing now, he seems far from an ordinary rogue." Felix gave a half-laugh. "A rogue? If rogues can fight like that, the kingdom's maidens better beware." Marcus seemed lost in thought, as though seriously considering Felix's jest. "Unbelievable. A man who can match the finest knight turns out to be a rogue? That's just." Before Felix could finish, the steam cloud dissipated, swept away by the force of the ongoing clash between Wood and Julius, revealing their forms once more. Felix simply marveled at Wood's youth and strength. Reinhard, however, reacted with visible surprise, exclaiming, "It's Wood. I was wondering how a swordsman here could stand up to Julius. Now it makes sense." Reinhard's reaction was noted by Marcus and Felix, who both turned their curious gazes toward him. "So, Reinhard, you actually know this young man? Who is he?" Marcus asked, intrigued. "Strictly speaking, I don't know Wood well," Reinhard replied, still watching the duel intently. "But the last time I needed help locating Lady Felt, it was with his assistance." Reinhard paused, a wry smile crossing his face. "There was a bit of a misunderstanding, and we ended up fighting. That's when I realized he's incredibly strong." Marcus and Felix exchanged shocked glances. "And? I assume you won that fight?" Marcus pressed, certain of Reinhard's supremacy as the Sword Saint. "Technically, yes. But he only surrendered after explaining the misunderstanding," Reinhard admitted. "To be honest, he nearly took me down. If I hadn't gained a new blessing mid-fight, I would have triggered my Phoenix blessing." The revelation left Marcus and Felix even more astounded. They had difficulty believing that anyone could push the Sword Saint to such extremes. "If it wasn't for his restraint, I doubt I'd have survived unscathed. He left me curious and slightly regretful that he declined a rematch. It's a pleasant surprise to see him here in the capital," Reinhard added, his expression thoughtful. Marcus and Felix's view of Wood shifted entirely after hearing this. If Reinhard, known to be unmatched as the Sword Saint, had nearly been defeated by Wood, it was no exaggeration to call him a monstrous talent. The duel between Wood and Julius continued fiercely. After hearing Reinhard's account, Marcus and Felix felt that the outcome was all but decided. Though Julius was undoubtedly formidable, his power simply couldn't compare to that of the Sword Saint. If Wood could battle on par with someone as overpowered as Reinhard, then Julius likely had little chance of victory. However, Julius himself remained blissfully unaware of these musings. Instead, as the battle grew ever more intense, he found himself, unusually, exhilarated. Chapter 352, Magic Sword Technique? I can do that too. Within the Royal Guard, Julius basically had no suitable sparring partners. Reinhard, the Sword Saint, was far too monstrous. His overwhelming strength placed him on a completely different level compared to others, making his abilities almost unattainable for any ordinary knight. As for the rest of the members, their abilities were nowhere near Julius's level, leaving him without a worthy opponent to hone his skills. Felix was strong when it came to magic, but his specialty lay in water-based healing spells. He served more as a support character, excelling in providing healing and assistance, which made him better than most knights, but not a match for Julius in combat. Now, however, standing across from Wood, Julius faced an opponent like none he had ever encountered. Both of them were skilled in swordsmanship and magic, which sparked a rare excitement in Julius. For the first time, he found himself matched against someone who could match his unique combination of abilities. With his long sword in hand, Julius began his elegant dance, aided by the spirits of wind that answered his call. Blades of wind shot out from his sword, slicing through the air as they rushed towards Wood. From their previous exchanges, Julius had already gleaned an understanding of Wood. His basic physical abilities, such as speed and strength, appeared to surpass his own. It was clear that trying to go head-to-head physically would be a foolish strategy. Julius needed to rely on his skill to win. Thanks to his divine blessing of the spirits, the micro-spirits in the atmosphere favored him, augmenting his magic use and making it more effective while consuming less mana. Though Wood could also use magic, Julius, with the spirits' favor, could amplify the power of his spells and reduce mana expenditure. 5 wind blades converged in the air, taking on the form of a claw as they tore towards Wood. Yet Wood had no intention of dodging. Instead, he took on a stance to draw his sword, clearly intent on intercepting the attack head-on. Is he planning to counter Julius's attack by using a magic-imbued sword strike of his own? But that would play directly into Julius's plan, wouldn't it? Considering Julius's affinity with spirits, the mana he consumes while casting is far less than anyone else. The members of the royal guard watching from the stands were, for the most part, untrained in the ways of magic, including Marcos and Reinhard. However, as an adept user of water magic, Felix could immediately see what Julius intended. It was clear. Julius aimed to take advantage of his low mana consumption and draw the battle into a war of attrition, hoping to deplete Wood's mana entirely, thus gaining an edge over his opponent's superior physical abilities. Hyaki Yagio style, one sword technique. Atachi. The air surrounding Wood seemed to be guided by an invisible hand, gathering around his feet and forming a swirling vortex. The moment his sword left its sheath, the wind circling him responded instantly, launching itself forward. A massive wind blade, almost 10 meters wide and crescent-shaped, flew out from Wood's sword and collided with the 5 wind blades released by Julius. The collision of the claw-like wind blades and the crescent wind blade created a powerful gust of wind that raged through the entire field, forming a towering wind vortex at the point of impact. The fierce sword energy and wind blades whipped about like countless flying daggers, leaving deep gouges across the ground. That wind magic is incredibly powerful. Even with the spirit's aid, Julius only managed to match it. Watching the whirling cyclone of blades on the field, Marcos was astounded. Wood not only knew how to use magic, but was proficient in multiple elements. He had already blocked Julius's water-based magic earlier, and now he wielded wind magic as well. No. That man didn't use magic just now. There isn't a trace of mana lingering in the air. Felix interjected, his expression one of disbelief. That fierce strike just now. It wasn't magic. It was pure sword energy. Are you telling me the sword energy he released had the power equivalent to magic? You can't be serious. Marcos knew powerful knights could release sword energy, and even he could do so himself. But sword energy was usually enough to break through weaker armor or cut skin. Nothing more. To create something of Wood's scale seemed like an impossible dream. Felix is telling the truth. Wood's swordsmanship is powerful. When I fought him, he used a similar move, but thanks to my divine blessing of evasion, it had no effect on me. Reinhard said. And I think Julius's strategy is flawed. Trying to exhaust Wood's mana might sound like a good idea, but Wood's mana supply. While Reinhard, Felix, and Marcos were busy analyzing Wood's abilities, Wood himself faced Julius, saying calmly. Here's some advice. You'd better use your full strength right from the start if you want any chance against me. It seems you possess some kind of special blessing, and you're planning to deplete my mana in a prolonged fight. Wood continued. But I'm warning you, if we drag this out, you won't have even the slightest chance of winning. Though it may sound boastful, my mana capacity, the gate within my body, is likely far beyond what you can imagine. As if to prove he wasn't just bluffing, Wood let go of the magic that suppressed his mana output. The ground beneath his feet began to quake violently as a terrifying amount of mana surged from his body, like a flood bursting through a dam. The sheer volume of mana formed a visible pillar of energy, reaching skyward, distorting the air around it and disrupting the magic of the knight's simulation battle area. The ground beneath Wood shattered, and spiderweb-like cracks spread across the field as his mana stabilized at its peak. Everyone watching felt their eyes widen in shock. Even those without any magical talent could tell that Wood's mana reserves were on a whole other level. They weren't blind. Just the release of his mana alone had shaken the entire area, causing the earth itself to tremble. If Wood were to truly fight, what would happen then? This isn't just some guy from the countryside. He is in the same league as Reinhard. A real monster. Do you understand now? If you're planning on exhausting my mana, with the scale of this fight, I could keep going for 3 days straight without rest. My mana recovery rate also exceeds the norm. So, if you want to defeat me, you'll have to land a decisive blow and take me down completely. So let's keep fighting. Pick up your sword and use your strongest move. Don't worry about killing me. Though I don't have an ability like resurrection, my healing power is formidable. Even if I lose a limb,